Hi guys, indeed tonight we're stepping into the complete history of rice, the small pale grain that somehow managed to feed empires, comfort children, inspire rituals, start fortunes, and make countless cooks mutter quietly at a pot lid. Imagine warm mist rising from a flooded field, frogs ticking in the dark like tiny clocks, and your bare feet sinking into cool mud as moonlight trembles on the water. How did this humble grass become the daily heartbeat of billions? Why did kings count it? Priests bless it, farmers fear losing it, and families gather around it as if around a little white fire. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you get comfortable, comment where you're listening from and your local time. Maybe it is midnight in Manila, early evening in London, or some impossible hour in Toronto. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself wander into a world before bowls, before chopsticks, before steam curling from kitchen roofs. You stand at the edge of an ancient wetland, long before rice has a name in any language. The air is heavy and green. Reeds whisper against one another. Insects thrum in slow waves. Somewhere nearby, waterbirds lift their feet carefully through the shallows, searching for snails and small fish. The ground gives beneath you, soft and cold, pressing between your toes with that unmistakable wet earth feeling. It smells of mud, leaf rot, fresh water, and sunlight trapped inside plants. Here, rice is not yet a crop. It is a wild grass, not glamorous, not organized, certainly not politely arranged in neat fields. It grows where water lingers, where floods come and go, where the season decides everything and humans are only visitors. Its seeds are tiny compared with the plump grains you know. They cling to stems until the right moment, then scatter. Wild plants do not care about your dinner plans. They have their own schedule, which is honestly a little rude. You move through stands of ancient grasses, brushing your hand along their blades. Some edges feel sharp enough to sting. The seed heads nod in the damp air, fragile and ordinary. Yet inside them lies a possibility so large it is almost difficult to hold in the mind. These plants belong to the genus Oryza, and over many thousands of years, certain wild rice species will become ancestors of the cultivated rice that fills markets, kitchens, temples, and lunchboxes across the planet. The mainstream fact is simple but enormous. The earliest domesticated rice most likely began in the wetlands and river regions of ancient China, especially around the Yangtze River basin, where people gradually selected plants with traits useful for farming. But from your place in this prehistoric marsh, there are no farms yet. There are only gatherers watching seasons, learning which patches ripen first, which seeds fall too quickly, which plants stand taller, which grains cook better. History begins not with a single genius pointing dramatically at a swamp and declaring, "Behold, dinner," but with many quiet observations repeated over generations. You crouch near the waterline. Your fingers close around a seed head. A few grains loosen into your palm. They are rough, enclosed in husk, almost disappointing if you expected instant supper. To eat them, someone must collect many, dry them, pound them, winnow them, cook them. That is a lot of effort for a handful of grass seeds. And yet hunger is a patient teacher. Curiosity is patient too. People return to the same places, notice the same plants, remember what worked. Some scholars believe that long before full farming, communities may have practiced a kind of careful gathering that leaned toward cultivation. They may have cleared competing plants, protected useful stands, or scattered seeds in favourable mud. Not farming in the tidy textbook sense, but not pure foraging either. A middle world. Historians still argue whether rice domestication happened through one main process in China that later spread widely, or through several related experiments in different regions. Archaeology gives clues, but ancient mud does not always explain itself clearly. Typical mud behaviour. Really? Around you? The wetland keeps breathing. Frogs pulse from hidden places. Dragonflies skim the skin of the water. A warm breeze carries the smell of crushed stems. You hear the faint slap of feet in mud as people move through the marsh with baskets. Their clothing is made from plant fibres, bark cloth, skins, or woven materials that time will mostly erase. Their voices are low. Their knowledge is not written down. But it is not simple. They know when birds arrive, when fish spawn, when floodwater retreats, when seeds are ready. They read the landscape the way later people will read royal records. A quirky little tidbit waits here among the reeds, rice as a grass, just like wheat, barley, oats, and even the lawn grass that modern people try to keep alive with heroic amounts of optimism. The difference is that rice learned to thrive with wet feet. Many varieties can grow in flooded conditions that would make other crops sulk dramatically and fail. That ability will later make rice perfect for monsoon landscapes and river plains, although it will also demand careful control of water, labour, and timing. But right now, no one sees rice as destiny. It is one food among many. People eat fish, roots, nuts, fruits, shellfish, animals, and other seeds. Their diet shifts with place and season. Rice is not yet the centre of life. It is a possibility gathered in baskets, tasted beside firelight, stored perhaps in small amounts if conditions allow. You can imagine a family at dusk, smoke drifting upward, children listening to elders speak, someone cracking husks from grains with a stone. The sound is small, steady, almost sleepy. Tap, scrape, breathe. Tap, scrape, breathe. You watch as seeds fall from wild plants into the mud. Most vanish into water, eaten by birds or buried too deep. Some sprout. A few carry traits that humans will one day favour grains that stay on the stalk longer, plants that mature together, seeds that are less brittle, harvests that are easier to collect. Domestication is often described as humans changing plants, and that is true, but plants changed humans too. Rice would ask people to stay, to plan, to cooperate, to manage water, to measure seasons with sharper attention. It would invite villages to grow larger, calendars to matter more, and meals to become dependable enough for populations to rise. The atmosphere settles into evening. The wetland darkens from green to blue to black. Mosquitoes whine with unnecessary enthusiasm. Somewhere. A bird cries once and goes silent. You feel the cooling mud around your ankles and the damp air on your skin, in your palm. The wild grains are almost weightless. They do not look like the beginning of cities. Rituals, taxes, poetry, migrations, family recipes, or midnight rice porridge when someone is ill. They look like seeds, and that is the quiet magic of it. Before rice fed billions, it waited in water, before it became white, brown, red, black, sticky, fragrant, long, short, sacred, taxed, traded, stolen, celebrated, and endlessly debated by cooks who swear their method is the only correct one. It was a wild plant bending in the marsh wind. You take one last look across the ancient shallows. The surface reflects a sky untouched by maps. The people here do not know they are standing near the beginning of one of humanity's greatest food stories. They only know the season is turning, the seeds are ready, and tomorrow the baskets must be filled again. You step into the damp warmth of the lower Yangtze world, where the river does not simply pass through the land, but seems to breathe through it. Water gathers in pools, channels, marshes, and slow shining bends. Mist rests low over the reeds. The air smells of wet clay, fish scales, smoke, and green shoots bruised underfoot. Somewhere close by, a wooden paddle knocks softly against the side of a boat, and from a village near the water, you hear the muffled rhythm of people waking into work. This is southern China thousands of years ago, a place of lakes, wetlands, seasonal floods, and patient human experiment. The rice here is no longer only something gathered when the marsh happens to be generous. People are beginning to guide it. They return to the same patches. They notice which grains hold firm to the stalk. They keep seed from useful plants. They learn that mud can be shaped, water can be encouraged, and a wild grass can slowly become a companion, though a slightly demanding one. You walk beside a small settlement raised near waterlogged ground. Houses may stand on wooden posts to keep floors above damp earth. Smoke slips through simple roofs. Dogs nose around discarded shells. Children watch adults with baskets, tools, and bundles of cut grasses. The sounds are gentle but constant splashing feet, scraping stone, low voices, the slap of wet fibre being twisted or worked. Nobody is rushing in the modern sense, yet everyone is busy. Rice does not care for lazy timing. It prefers devotion, which is a polite word for a great deal of labour. A mainstream historical fact settles into the scene. Archaeological evidence from sites in the Yangtze River region shows that people were cultivating rice many thousands of years ago, making this area one of the key heartlands of rice domestication. Places such as Hemudu and Shangshan have helped scholars understand how early communities used rice, stored it, cooked it, and gradually changed it. The history is not a single bright spark. It is a long glow, made by hands repeating small tasks until the landscape itself begins to change. You kneel near a muddy plot where young rice plants stand in shallow water. They are delicate, almost shy, their blades thin and bright. Someone has pressed seedlings into the soft ground with fingers that know the right depth from memory. The mud closes around each root with a quiet suck. Cool water laps your ankles. A breeze moves over the field, and all the little green blades tremble together, like whispers answering a question. Farming rice in this setting is not simply throwing seeds and hoping for dinner, though, honestly, that would have been convenient. It means watching water, too little, and the plants suffer, too much at the wrong moment, and seedlings drown or wash away. The farmer must understand rain, flood, soil, and season. The farmer must also understand patience, which is less glamorous but far more common in history than heroic speeches. You follow a woman carrying a basket lined with leaves. In it are grains saved from an earlier harvest, still enclosed in husks. Perhaps her family selected these because they were easier to gather, or because they cooked well, or because they came from plants that stood strong. She may not think of herself as changing a species. She's simply choosing what keeps people fed. Yet this ordinary act is one of the great engines of civilization. Selection does not need a throne. It can happen beside a hearth. There is uncertainty here, and it matters. Scholars still debate whether early Yangtze communities first cultivated rice mainly in naturally wet marshes, gradually managing wild stands, or whether they moved fairly quickly toward more deliberate field systems. The traces are faint impressions in pottery, ancient grains, phytoliths, tools, post holes, charred remains. Each clue is small, and each asks to be interpreted with care. The past rarely hands anyone a neat receipt saying, "Congratulations. Farming began today," very inconsiderate of the past. But there it is. At the village edge, you see pottery vessels resting near a fire. Some are darkened with soot. Some may have held rice gruel, steamed grains, fish, or mixtures of plants gathered from the surrounding wetlands. The smell is earthy and comforting. A soft steam rising from food that would seem plain to a palace, but precious to a hungry family. A child reaches toward the warmth, then pulls back as an elder murmurs a warning. The fire crackles, and the evening air thickens with smoke and damp. A quirky tidbit drifts into the moment some of the oldest rice evidence has been found not only as grains, but as tiny silica shapes called phytoliths, left behind by plants long after the softer parts vanished. In other words, rice can leave microscopic calling cards in the soil. Even when the grain is gone, the plant whispers, "I was here." It is a charmingly stubborn little signature from a very old meal. You stand near a storage pit or raised container where grain may be kept away from moisture and hungry animals. Storage changes everything. When food can be saved, a community can remain in place longer. When people remain in place, houses become sturdier, paths become familiar, graves gather near homes, and memory settles into the land. The scent of stored grain is dry and faintly sweet beneath the wet smell of the village. It promises tomorrow, and tomorrow is a powerful invention. Rice also brings people together in work. One person can gather wild seeds, but fields require cooperation. Someone clears plants, someone tends seedlings, someone repairs buns of mud, someone watches birds, someone harvests, dries, pounds, cooks, and shares. You hear laughter from a group working along the edge of a flooded patch, their legs splashed with brown water. One person slips and recovers with great dignity, which fools absolutely no one. Even in prehistory, mud probably had a sense of humour. As seasons pass, the rice and the villagers shape one another. Plants with useful traits become more common. People learn to build routines around planting and harvest. Meals grow more predictable. The village breathes with the crop-wet preparation, green growth, ripening heads, cutting, drying, pounding, cooking. The rhythm is slow enough for sleep, yet strong enough to guide generations. Night settles over the Yangtze wetlands. Frogs begin their soft chorus. Smoke lies low over the homes. The fields shine faintly under the moon, each young plant rooted in mud, each root held by water, each seed carrying a promise not yet fully understood. You feel the cool damp against your skin and listen to the quiet sounds of people living close to river, soil, and grain in their hands. Rice is becoming more than food. It is becoming a way to stay. You enter a village where the day begins with smoke, damp earth, and the soft clatter of pottery. The settlement sits close to water, but it is no longer only a place people pass through when food is available. It has the feeling of return. Paths have been pressed into the ground by many feet. Hearths have darkened the same corners again and again. The smell of cooked grain lingers in the morning air, mixed with pig pens, river mud, wood ash, and the green sweetness of reeds. Here, rice is part of a wider world of village life. It does not stand alone like a lonely hero in a very tiny hat. It sits among tools, animals, houses, storage pits, baskets, boats, fishing nets, and clay vessels. You hear pigs grunting somewhere behind a fence of posts and woven branches. Chickens may not yet be part of every scene, depending on place and time, but dogs are likely close by, alert for scraps and deeply committed to the ancient profession of looking hopeful near food. You walk toward the fields, where water has been encouraged into low plots. Mud walls, simple but useful, hold shallow pools in place. Their surfaces glimmer under pale light. A farmer steps carefully along a narrow ridge, toes gripping the slick earth. Each movement is balanced, practiced, almost graceful. Then the mud shifts, and dignity becomes negotiation. Rice farming teaches the body to move slowly. It also teaches the body that the ground has opinions. A mainstream historical fact is clear in this village world. Neolithic communities in parts of China developed settled ways of life that combined rice cultivation with pottery making, animal keeping, fishing, gathering, and craft production. Sites linked to early rice cultures show that farming did not replace everything at once. It blended with older habits. People still fished, they still gathered wild plants, they still hunted, but cultivated rice gave daily life a new centre, a reliable rhythm around which other activities could gather. You step inside a house where the floor feels packed and cool beneath your feet. A pot rests near the hearth, its surface rough under your fingertips. Clay vessels matter deeply here. Without pottery, cooking rice is far more difficult. Grains can be boiled into soft porridge, steamed in clever arrangements, or mixed with other foods. Pottery also stores grain, carries water, and transforms meals from hurried roasting into something warmer and slower. The pot is not just an object. It is a quiet, domestic revolution with a very practical personality. At the hearth, a woman stirs a thick mixture. Steam touches your face. It smells mild, earthy, slightly sweet, with a trace of smoke. The rice may be less polished than a modern white grains, richer in texture, mixed with husk fragments or other seeds. No one here is asking whether it pairs well with a delicate sauce reduction. People want warmth, fullness, strength for work, and something that can be shared. The wooden spoon scrapes the pot in a slow circular sound, soothing as rain on leaves, nearby. A child shapes wet clay between small palms, imitating an adult. The clay is cold and slippery, leaving grey smears on skin. Pottery making begins with earth and water, which feels fitting in a rice village. Clay is dug, kneaded, shaped, dried, fired. Some pots crack, some survive. Some carry patterns pressed by cord, comb, fingertip, or woven mats. These marks are not only decoration. They are touch made permanent, little echoes of hands that needed useful things and sometimes made them beautiful too. A quirky tidbit waits inside these clay surfaces. Archaeologists sometimes find rice husks mixed into ancient pottery, either by accident or as temper to help strengthen the clay during firing. So a broken pot can preserve the ghost of a harvest inside its walls. Imagine that. A pot does not merely hold rice. Sometimes rice helps hold the pot together. History enjoys these small jokes, though it tells them very slowly. Outside, the pigs complain with magnificent confidence. Pig keeping becomes important in many rice farming communities because pigs can live near settlements, eat scraps, and convert waste into meat, fat, bone, and social value. Their smell is sharp and warm, not exactly poetic, unless your poem has given up trying to impress anyone. You hear them rooting in the pen, snouts working through damp refuse. Their presence says something important. Settled communities create leftovers, storage, boundaries, and new relationships between humans and animals. Yet the village is not peaceful in a simple storybook way. Food must be protected. Stored grain attracts rodents, insects, damp, and thieves with either 2 legs or 4. A bad flood can ruin fields. A dry season can shrink yields. Disease can spread more easily where people live close to one another with animals. Farming gives stability, but it also ties people to risk. You feel it in the careful placement of houses, the guarded storage, the watchful eyes near the fields. Scholars remain uncertain about how quickly social differences appeared in these early rice communities. Some burials contain richer goods than others, and some houses or storage areas suggest unequal access to resources. But interpretation is tricky. Researchers continue to discuss whether these differences show emerging hierarchy, family variation, ritual roles, or simply uneven preservation. Ancient villages do not speak in tidy categories. They murmur through broken pots, post holes, bones, and seeds. You walk through the settlement as afternoon softens. People work in groups. Some pound grain using stone or wooden tools, lifting and dropping with a hollow rhythm. Thud. Pause. Thud. Husk loosens from kernel. Chaff rises as a dusty smell in the air, dry against the nose after the wet scent of fields. Others mend nets, carve wood, twist fibre, tend fire, shape clay, or clean fish. Rice may be the dependable centre, but life remains mixed, practical, and busy. There is atmosphere in every corner. Warm smoke clings to roofs. Wet sandals leave dark marks near doorways. A baby cries, then quiets against someone's shoulder. Dogs bark at nothing in particular, maintaining a proud tradition. A pot cools beside the hearth, ticking softly as clay contracts. The fields beyond the houses gleam with reflected sky, and water insects stitch quick lines over the surface. As evening lowers, the village gathers into itself. The pigs settle into grunts. The last light catches pottery rims stacked near a wall. Someone carries a bowl of rice gruel carefully with both hands. You feel its warmth through the clay, humble and steady. This is not yet the age of palaces or written tax records. It is the age of households, mud ridges, animal pens, storage pits, and cooking pots. In this world, rice becomes daily, not legendary, not distant, not served beneath golden roofs, but ladled near fires where people are tired and hungry. It fills stomachs, anchors routines, and gives a village reason to endure beside water. The grain is still small, but around it life is growing larger. You follow the grain outward into a wider, wetter world, where rivers braid through valleys and coastlines open like doors. Rice does not travel by itself, of course. It has no tiny sandals, no heroic backpack, no dramatic farewell speech beside the marsh. It moves with people. It moves in baskets, in seed bundles, in cooking pots, in memory. And in the quiet confidence of farmers who believe a plant can survive in new soil if treated with care. You stand near a shoreline where boats rest against mudflats, their hulls smelling of wet wood, fish oil, and old rope. The tide breathes in and out. Gulls cry above the shallows. Someone loads a bundle of seed grain wrapped in woven material. Someone else carries pottery, stone tools, dried food, and the private worries of every traveller since the beginning of travel. Will the weather hold? Will the new place be kind? Will the rice grow? Very reasonable concerns. Really, rice may be small, but it has always had a talent for making humans plan seriously. Across Eastern Asia, rice spreads through contact, migration, trade, and imitation. In some places it arrives as a cultivated crop, already carrying the marks of selection. In other places it meets local plants, local methods, and local climates, becoming part of different farming systems. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly here. Rice cultivation spread from early centres in China into regions including Korea and Japan, where it eventually became central to settled farming life, especially in wet paddy systems. This movement was not one neat wave. It was a long series of crossings, experiments, delays, and adaptations. You walk into a valley in ancient Korea, where the air is cooler than the low wetlands farther south. Hills rise around small fields. The smell is sharper here, pine, damp leaves, smoke from hearths, and mud freshly turned near a stream. Rice must adjust to shorter growing seasons and different landscapes. Farmers learn which varieties ripen in time, which fields hold water best, and which slopes can be worked without exhausting everyone into becoming philosophical about hunger. The sound of tools carries over the valley. Stone blades cut grasses, wooden implements scrape soil, water trickles through channels coaxed from streams. People do not simply copy an old method and call it a day. They reshape it. Rice travels, but every new village asks the same practical question: what does this land allow? The answer changes from valley to valley. Farther across the sea, you step into early Japan, where wet rice agriculture eventually becomes one of the defining features of the Yayoi period. The fields shimmer in lowland plains, reflecting clouds like broken mirrors. Water stands between ridges. Seedlings bend in the breeze. The atmosphere is damp, cool, and alive with insects. You hear frogs, rustling reeds, distant voices, and the clean splash of feet moving through paddies. Rice brings more than calories. It brings storage, seasonal labour, new settlement patterns, and changing relationships between communities. Fields require cooperation. Water rights need negotiation. Harvests can be counted. Surpluses can be stored, guarded, shared, traded, or claimed by those with power. A bowl of rice may look peaceful, but it often arrives with a committee meeting hiding behind it. Humans do love turning dinner into administration. You touch the water in a paddy. It is cool, with silt swirling around your fingers. The seedlings are soft near the root, sharper along the leaf. The air smells of algae, wet straw, smoke, and the faint sourness of standing water. This is not wilderness now. It is managed wetness. Rice has become a crop of choreography, asking farmers to match rain, transplanting, weeding, drainage, harvest, drying, and storage in careful sequence. But rice is not only moving north and east, it also spreads southward into the tropical and monsoon lands of mainland and island Southeast Asia. You enter a different climate, warmer and heavier, where the air presses gently against your skin like a damp cloth. Rain drums on broad leaves, rivers swell and retreat, forests steam after storms. In these landscapes, rice finds many homes, lowland paddies, rain-fed fields, upland swidens, river plains, and deltas that glisten beneath immense skies. In Southeast Asia, rice is not one simple thing. Some communities cultivate wet rice in flooded fields. Others grow upland rice without standing water, often in forest clearings where ash enriches the soil for a time. The grain adapts into countless local varieties, each tied to taste, season, ritual, altitude, and memory. Some are sticky, some are fragrant, some ripen quickly, some endure difficult conditions. A farmer may know more about the personalities of rice varieties than a modern person knows about passwords, and frankly, the rice knowledge is more nourishing. A quirky tidbit appears in the kitchen smoke of this broad Asian journey. Sticky rice, so beloved in parts of Southeast Asia, becomes sticky because of its starch composition, especially its very low amylose content. That invisible chemistry changes the way the grain clings together in the hand, wraps around mango, fills bamboo tubes, and behaves at feasts. A tiny change inside the grain creates entire food cultures, not bad for starch, which rarely gets invited to boast. Rice also enters South Asia through complicated pathways involving movement, exchange, and local cultivation. In the Indian subcontinent, ancient communities developed rich relationships with rice alongside other grains such as millet, wheat, and barley, depending on region and ecology. Wet eastern lands, river valleys, and monsoon zones become especially important. You stand in a field after rain, where warm earth releases a deep mineral smell, and the calls of birds echo across pools of water. The monsoon is not background here. It is the great seasonal actor, generous one year, moody the next, always demanding respect. Scholars still debate the exact routes, timings, and interactions involved in the spread of rice across Asia. Some evidence points to movement from China into neighbouring regions, while other evidence suggests local domestication or improvement of related rice populations in South Asia. Genetic studies, ancient plant remains, language patterns, and archaeology all contribute pieces, but the full picture remains beautifully untidy. History, once again, refuses to line up like a polite school group. As rice moves, it changes human taste. People learn to steam it, boil it, ferment it, pound it into cakes, wrap it in leaves, brew it into drinks, offer it to ancestors, and pack it for journeys. It becomes food for farmers and rulers, monks and merchants, babies and elders. It enters words, proverbs, ceremonies, and jokes. It becomes ordinary in the deepest sense, which is to say, essential. You pause beside a field at dusk somewhere along this vast route of travel. The sky glows violet. Water reflects the last light. Crickets begin their thin music. A farmer lifts a bundle of seedlings, roots dripping mud, and carries them across the paddy with slow care. The grain has crossed wetlands, valleys, islands, and monsoon plains, but everywhere it asks for the same intimacy, hands in water, eyes on weather, patience through the season. Rice is no longer just a local crop. It is becoming Asian in a grand, varied, deeply regional way. It belongs to river mist and mountain rain, to coastal boats and inland villages, to cool valleys and tropical storms. It travels quietly. But where it takes root, landscapes begin to listen. You drift into the age of monsoon kingdoms, where rain arrives not as weather, but as a ruler with 1,000 silver fingers. The sky darkens for weeks. Clouds gather like enormous sleeping animals. Then the first storm breaks, and the world exhales. Water drums on palm leaves, roofs, riverbanks, temple stones, and the backs of farmers bent over fields. The scent rises at once wet soil, crushed grass, smoke washed thin, flowers bruised by rain, and the deep green smell of land becoming generous. Here, rice is no longer only a village food. It is becoming the foundation beneath power. In river valleys, coastal plains, and tropical deltas, harvests support larger populations. Larger populations support rulers, priests, soldiers, builders, traders, scribes, boatmen, and all the people who somehow appear once food becomes steady enough to feed them. Civilization has many decorations: gold, carved pillars, royal titles, impressive hats. But underneath it all, someone has to grow dinner. You stand at the edge of a broad lowland plain in mainland Southeast Asia. Floodwater spreads across the fields in shining sheets. Buffalo move slowly through the mud, their dark backs slick with rain, their horns curved like quiet moons. A farmer guides one with a rope, feet sinking ankle deep with each step. The animal breathes heavily. The mud pulls and releases with soft gulping sounds. Rice seedlings wait nearby in bright green bundles, ready to be planted in the watery earth. A mainstream historical fact settles into the scene in many parts of South and Southeast Asia. Wet rice agriculture helped support the growth of early states and kingdoms by producing dense food supplies in fertile river valleys and deltas. Rice did not create kingdoms by itself, of course. It was not sitting in a field drafting royal law, but it made certain kinds of political life possible. When harvests could feed many people, Rulers could gather labour, sponsor temples, maintain courts, and collect tribute. You move along a canal where water slides quietly between raised banks. The surface carries bits of leaf, floating flowers, and the occasional insect that appears to be having a very small crisis. The canal is not just useful. It is a statement. Someone planned it. Someone organised workers to dig it. Someone decided where water should go and who would benefit from it. Rice fields thrive when water is guided, and the power to guide water often becomes the power to guide people. In the Great Plains of the Mekong, Chao Phraya, Irrawaddy, Red River, Ganges, and other monsoon-fed landscapes, rice encourages settlement in places where rivers flood, retreat, and leave behind fertile silt. Deltas become especially rich and difficult. They are wet, shifting, mosquito-filled, and sometimes dangerous. But they can also produce extraordinary abundance. You feel the air there, heavy and warm on your skin. You hear frogs clicking, paddles dipping, children calling from houses raised above damp ground. You smell fish fermenting in jars, rice steaming over fires, and rain-soaked thatch drying in brief sunlight. Rice also shapes time. The agricultural year bends around the monsoon. There is waiting for rain, preparing nurseries, transplanting seedlings, weeding fields, guarding ripening grain from birds, harvesting, threshing, drying, storing, feasting, and worrying, always some worrying. Humans have never needed help inventing that. A ruler may sit in a palace, but the kingdom's pulse is in the paddies, where people watch clouds with more seriousness than any court astrologer. In these kingdoms, rice can become tax. The grain that feeds a household can also fill royal storehouses. Tribute may arrive in baskets, jars, boats, or measured bundles. Stored rice can support workers building temples, walls, reservoirs, roads, and palaces. You can almost hear it, the scrape of baskets across wooden floors, the dull thump of sacks stacked in granaries, the rustle of husks, the creak of carts. Power becomes audible in grain. A quirky tidbit glimmers in this watery world in parts of Southeast Asia. Fish and rice fields have long lived together. Flooded paddies can provide habitat for fish, frogs, snails, crabs, and edible aquatic plants. So a rice field is not always just a field. Sometimes it is also a pantry with fins and legs. A farmer walking through the paddy may be tending grain while quietly noticing dinner swimming between the stems. Efficient, really, and much tastier than a government memo. The rise of monsoon kingdoms is also tied to ritual and display. Temples and shrines rise near rivers and fields. Kings present themselves as guardians of fertility, order, and cosmic balance. Ceremonies may ask for rain, honor ancestors, bless seed, or celebrate harvest. You stand near a ritual ground where incense curls into damp air. Bells sound softly. White rice may be placed in bowls, scattered in blessing, or cooked for offerings. The grain becomes a bridge between soil and spirit, labour and legitimacy. Still, scholars are careful. Historians continue to question how directly rice agriculture caused the rise of early states. Did abundant rice create rulers? Or did rulers intensify rice farming to support their ambitions? Did irrigation systems require central authority? Or did local communities manage them first, with kings arriving later to claim credit in the usual royal fashion? Evidence differs across regions, and the relationship between water, labour, and power is never simple. The paddies remember many hands, not just the names carved on monuments. You walk through a market near a river port. Rain has paused, everything shines, baskets of rice sit beside fish, salt, fruit, pottery, cloth, spices, and metal tools. The smell is rich and layered coconut oil, wet wood, smoke, ripe mango, river mud, and grain dust. Merchants speak in several tongues. Boats bump softly against the bank. Rice moves from field to market, from market to storehouse, from storehouse to kitchen, from kitchen to bowl. With each movement, it ties villages to towns, towns to courts, courts to distant trade. The atmosphere grows golden as the sun lowers behind cloud banks. Water buffalo return from the fields, bells faint around their necks. Farmers rinse mud from their legs in a canal. Children chase each other along raised paths, then stop when an adult gives them the ancient look that says, "Please do not fall into the irrigation system." Smoke rises from cooking fires. The first evening pots begin to steam. You hold a warm bowl in your hands. The rice inside is soft, plain, and fragrant. It carries no crown, yet crowns depend on it. It has no army, yet armies march because it fills granaries. It has no temple voice, yet prayers gather around its planting and harvest. In the monsoon world, rice is rain made edible, mud made dependable, water turned into power. Night comes slowly. The fields reflect a few early stars. Frogs begin their patient chorus. The kingdom sleeps, but the paddies keep the memory of labour, flood, seed, and season. Beneath every palace, every canal, every carved tower, there is this quiet grain, rooted in water, holding up the weight of history without making a fuss. You enter a quieter world of lamps, courtyards, temple steps, and family hearths, where rice is not only eaten but addressed with respect. The grain sits in bowls, baskets, leaf packets, clay vessels, and polished wooden trays. It steams in the morning light. It dries in the sun. It waits in granaries with the faint scent of straw and dust. Around it, people speak softly, gesture carefully, and make room for the unseen. Rice has become sacred because hunger is never only physical. A full bowl comforts the body, but it also steadies the mind. It says the rains came. It says the fields survived. It says the ancestors have not been forgotten. Across much of Asia, rice enters ritual life as an offering to spirits, gods, ancestors as testia, and household guardians. A mainstream historical fact is clear in many rice-growing societies. Rice became deeply tied to ceremonies of fertility, prosperity, purity, hospitality, and remembrance. You stand at the edge of a small shrine. The air smells of incense, flowers, oil lamps, and cooked grain. A bowl of rice has been placed before an image or spirit tablet. Its surface is plain and white, almost glowing in the dimness. Outside, a rooster announces itself with impressive confidence, as if personally responsible for sunrise. Inside, a hand lifts a few grains and places them with care. The movement is small, but the feeling is large. Rice is powerful in ritual partly because it is ordinary. That sounds odd at first. But sacred things often live inside ordinary repetition. People do not encounter rice once in a lifetime. They meet it every day. They wash it, cook it, serve it, share it, spill it, save it, worry about it, and thank it. When a food appears at every meal, it becomes a language. A wedding bowl of rice says abundance. Rice thrown or sprinkled in blessing says fertility and good fortune. Rice placed with the dead says nourishment for a journey no living person can fully describe. You walk into a village during a harvest celebration. The fields beyond the houses are golden, their heads heavy and bowed. The air is dry compared with planting season, filled with chaff, sun-warmed straw, and smoke from cooking fires. Drums sound in the distance, slow and hollow. Someone laughs while tying bundles. Someone else scolds a child for stepping on grain. Because apparently even joy requires supervision. Rice is gathered. But it is also honoured. The harvest is relief made visible. In many places, rice is linked with female divinity, mother figures, or spirit beings who embody fertility and the life of the crop. You may hear stories of a rice mother, a rice goddess, or a spirit living within the grain itself. These traditions vary widely, shaped by local language, ecology, and memory. Some households treat the first harvested rice with special care. Some communities invite the spirit of the rice back to the granary. Some mark planting and harvest with songs, dances, and offerings. A quirky tidbit rests inside these beliefs in parts of Southeast Asia. People have treated rice as having a soul or vital essence, so careless handling of the grain could be seen as disrespectful or even risky. Imagine being told not to waste rice not only because food is precious, but because the rice might take offence. Honestly, that is one way to make children finish dinner with a slightly more philosophical attitude. You feel the texture of unhusked rice between your fingers. It is rough, dry, and whispery. Polished rice feels smoother, cooler, more like tiny shells. Cooked rice is warm and yielding, clinging gently to the hand or spoon. These textures matter in ritual. Some offerings use raw grain. Others use cooked rice, rice cakes, rice flour, rice wine, or sweet rice dishes prepared with coconut, palm sugar, milk, fruit, beans, or spices. Transformation itself becomes meaningful. Grain becomes meal, meal becomes gift, gift becomes prayer. In a household courtyard, preparations for a wedding begin before sunrise. Steam rises from large pots. Women and men work together, rinsing rice in wide basins until the water turns cloudy, then clearer. The sound is soothing hands moving through grain, water poured, ladles tapping rims, firewood snapping. The smell is warm and milky from cooking rice, mixed with flowers, fresh leaves, and human excitement barely pretending to be calm. Rice appears as a wish for plenty, children, stability, and shared meals. Marriage, after all, is partly the decision to keep asking what is for dinner with the same person. You shift to a funeral setting, and the atmosphere grows hushed. Rice may be offered to the deceased, placed on altars, included in mourning meals, or used in rites meant to guide, protect, or honour. The grain's meaning changes with the moment. At a wedding, it may speak of beginnings. At a funeral, it may speak of continuity. It says the living still cook. The dead are still remembered. The household remains connected through food, breath, smoke, and name. Scholars still argue whether some rice rituals originated mainly from agricultural fertility practices, ancestor worship, political authority, or later religious reinterpretation. The difficulty is that rituals change while pretending to stay ancient. A ceremony may preserve a very old gesture, but the explanation around it can shift over centuries. People inherit actions, then give them fresh meanings. The rice remains in the bowl, quietly allowing humans to be complicated. Rice also enters myth. In some stories, it is a divine gift. In others, it springs from sacrifice, from a goddess's body, from a miraculous plant, from the kindness or anger of spirits. These myths often explain why rice must be treated carefully, why planting matters, why harvest must be celebrated, or why humans depend on forces beyond themselves. You listen as an elder speaks near the fire. The voice is low. Children lean in. Outside, night insects hum. The story turns rice from crop into memory. In courts and temples, rice can become part of state ritual. Rulers sponsor ceremonies to bless fields and affirm their role as guardians of prosperity. Priests, monks, shamans, or ritual specialists may handle rice in ways that ordinary people recognize as both practical and cosmic. When the harvest is good, authority shines. When it fails, questions gather like storm clouds. A king may claim heavenly favour, but empty granaries have always been brutally honest critics. You sit beside a family meal as evening settles. A lamp flickers. Bowls are passed from hand to hand. No one gives a speech about sacred agriculture. They simply eat. The rice is warm, fragrant, and soft. It carries the labour of fields and the weight of prayers, but it also soaks up sauce very nicely, which should not be dismissed as a minor contribution to civilization. The room grows calm. Outside, wind moves through drying stalks. Inside, a few grains cling to the side of a bowl. Bright in the lamplight, you understand why rice became sacred, not because it was rare, but because it was constant. Not because it was distant, but because it touched the mouth, the hand, the hearth, the grave, and the altar. It fed the living, accompanied the dead, welcomed the newly married, and gave thanks to powers no one could fully see. In the soft hush before sleep, rice is no longer merely a grain. It is a promise shaped by water, carried by custom, and placed gently between human hunger and human hope. You climb into the mountains where rice fields no longer spread flat beneath a wide sky, but rise in steps carved into the slopes. Mist drifts between ridges. The air is cooler here, thin and damp against your cheeks. Water trickles from unseen springs, passing from one ledge to another in silver threads. Below you, the terraces curve around the hills like quiet green fingerprints, each level holding a small shining mirror of sky. Your feet find a narrow path packed by generations of farmers. One side climbs steeply upward, the other falls away toward fields that seem to float. The earth is slick beneath your soles, and the grass along the ridge brushes your ankles with cold beads of dew. Somewhere above, a bird calls once from the forest. Somewhere below, a hoe bites into mud with a soft, wet chop. The sound is steady, patient, and almost hypnotic. A mainstream historical fact rests in this landscape across parts of Asia, including southern China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Himalayan foothills. Communities built rice terraces to grow crops on steep terrain where flat lowland fields were limited. These terraces required skilled engineering, careful water control, and constant maintenance. They were not accidental scenery made for postcards. They were survival shaped into beauty, though the postcards certainly did not hurt later. You pause beside a terrace wall built from packed earth and stone. It feels damp and cool under your palm. Moss clings to its edges. Tiny roots hold the soil together. A farmer checks a small opening where water enters one field, then blocks it with mud and plant matter to redirect the flow. The gesture is quick, almost casual, but it carries deep knowledge. Too much water can break a wall. Too little can weaken the crop. On these slopes, farming is a conversation with gravity, and gravity is not known for being flexible. The terraces are not all the same. Some are broad enough for several people to work side by side. Others are narrow, barely more than curved ledges cut into the mountain. In young fields, seedlings stand bright green in shallow water. In older fields, stalks grow taller, bending with ripening grain. The water reflects passing clouds, then shivers when the wind moves. You smell mud, wet stone, wood smoke from houses tucked higher on the slope, and the clean scent of mountain rain waiting somewhere in the distance. Terrace farming demands astonishing labour. Hillsides must be cut, levelled, reinforced, watered, drained, planted, weeded, and repaired after storms. Paths must be kept open, channels must be cleared of leaves, silt, and the occasional stubborn frog that has decided infrastructure is its personal lounge. Families and neighbours work together because one neglected wall can damage several fields below. Cooperation is not a decorative value here. It is the difference between harvest and collapse. You hear voices carried across the slope. A group plants seedlings in a line, backs bent, hands moving through water with practiced rhythm. The splash of each step blends with laughter, brief instructions, and the distant clank of a tool against stone. The work looks peaceful from far away. Up close, it is cold feet, aching backs, leeches in some places, slippery ridges, and careful attention. History often looks prettier when viewed from a comfortable distance. The farmers, quite reasonably, would notice the labour first. A quirky tidbit hides in the watery ledges. Some terraced rice landscapes also act like giant stair-stepped water storage systems. During rains, they slow runoff, hold moisture, and reduce erosion when properly maintained. So a terrace is not only a field, it is a small dam, a soil keeper, a water manager, and a very demanding garden all at once. If it had a resume, it would be annoyingly impressive. You walk toward a village set above the fields. Houses cluster along the slope, their roofs dark with moisture. Smoke threads upward from cooking fires, carrying the smell of rice, vegetables, and sometimes pork, fish, or fermented foods. Wooden beams feel smooth from touch and weather. Chickens scratch near doorways. Children run along paths that would make many adults freeze with alarm, but they move with the confidence of people born among steep places. From this height, you can see how terraces turn mountains into calendars. At planting time, the fields shine like liquid silver. During growth, they become bands of green. At harvest, they glow gold and rustle in the wind. After cutting, the fields rest brown and quiet. Each stage changes the mood of the whole valley. The mountain does not merely hold farms, it shows the season. Terraces also carry social memory. A wall may have been built by a great-grandparent. A channel may follow a route chosen so long ago that no one remembers the first hand that opened it. Rights to water can be inherited, negotiated, guarded, argued over, and blessed. A small stream can become a matter of family honour, village law, and occasional dramatic complaining. Rice farming in the hills is practical, but never only practical. Scholars still debate the exact age of some famous terrace systems and how continuously they have been cultivated. In some regions, oral traditions describe very ancient origins, while archaeological evidence may point to more complex histories of expansion, repair, abandonment, and renewal. Dating earthworks is difficult because terraces are constantly rebuilt. The field you see today may stand where an older one stood, altered again and again by rain, tools, and human need. As afternoon fades, clouds move lower, sliding over the ridges until the highest fields vanish. The air grows colder. You hear water everywhere now dripping from leaves, slipping through channels, falling in small threads from one terrace to the next. A farmer lifts a bundle of seedlings and carries it against one hip, clothes damp from mist. The plants smell fresh and green, their roots wrapped in a mud. You sit on a ridge between two fields and let the mountain breathe around you. Below, the terraces curve into shadow. Above, forest leans close, dark and wet. The mud ridge is firm but narrow beneath your hands. The water beside you holds the fading sky, pale and still. In this place, rice has climbed higher than seems reasonable. It has followed human hands into slopes, clouds, and cold springs. A bowl of mountain rice carries more than grain. It carries stone walls, shared water, bent backs, morning fog, repaired paths, and the patience of people who taught a hillside to feed them. The terraces grow quiet as night gathers, each field becoming a small dark mirror, each mirror holding the last light until even the mountain seems ready to sleep. You stand beside a canal at dawn, where the water is quiet but never truly still. It slides along a narrow channel cut through dark soil, carrying silt, leaves, and the pale reflection of a waking sky. The bank feels damp beneath your feet. Reed tips brush your legs. In the distance, a wooden gate creaks open, and water begins to pour into a field with a sound like cloth being unfolded. This is the world where rice becomes tied to organised labour, authority, and empire. A flooded paddy may look soft and peaceful, but behind it lives an entire system of decisions. Who digs the canal? Who repairs the banks? Who decides when water enters the field? Who receives it first when the stream runs low? Rice is tender in the hand, but politically it can be very sharp. A mainstream historical fact is clear across many rice-growing regions. Wet rice agriculture often encouraged large-scale irrigation works, coordinated labour, taxation, and administrative control. In parts of Asia, rulers and local elites gained power by managing water, collecting rice, and organising the people needed to maintain fields, canals, reservoirs, and dikes. A rice landscape is never just planted, it is built, argued over, measured, repaired, and watched. You walk along the canal as the sun rises. Workers are already there, carrying baskets of mud, stones, and cut brush. Their shoulders shine with sweat, their feet sink into the soft bank. The smell is strong and familiar wet clay, algae, human effort, smoke from breakfast fires, and the sour tang of standing water stirred from sleep. A man presses mud into a leak with both hands. A woman clears weeds from the channel with a hooked tool. A child brings a bundle of reeds, very serious about being useful. The soundscape is steady and low. Water trickles, tools scrape, buffalo snort nearby, their hides dark and slick. Someone calls instructions from a raised bank. Someone else mutters about how the old repair would have held if people had listened properly. Ancient irrigation, like modern plumbing, seems to have inspired strong opinions. Rice fields require timing. Water must be stored during abundance and shared during need. Too much at the wrong moment can rot roots or flatten young plants. Too little can leave fields cracking under heat. In lowlands, farmers build bunds to hold water around each plot. In valleys, they guide streams into channels. In deltas, they fight floods with embankments and gates. In dry seasons, they treasure every flow. The field becomes a kind of instrument, and water is the music that must be tuned. As rice production grows, rulers notice, of course they do. Rulers have always had an impressive talent for noticing things that can be counted, stored, and taxed. Grain becomes revenue. It can feed officials, soldiers, builders, servants, and court households. It can be moved to granaries and released in times of shortage, sometimes generously, sometimes strategically, sometimes with all the warmth of a ledger. To govern rice is to govern survival. You enter a storehouse where the air is dry and dusty after the wet fields outside. Rice sacks and baskets are stacked in rows. The smell is husk, straw, wood, and faint mouse danger. A clerk or overseer marks quantities on a tablet, tally stick, palm leaf, bamboo slip, or other recording material, depending on the place and era. Measurement matters now. A harvest is no longer only family food, it is obligation, rent, tribute, wage, a ration, and political promise. A quirky tidbit appears in the world of rice administration in several Asian societies. Units of rice became ways to measure wealth and rank, not merely food. In Japan, for example, later systems used rice yield as a measure of domain value. Imagine your social importance being calculated by how much grain your land could produce. It is less sparkly than jewels, but far more useful when everyone is hungry. You pass a group repairing a dam before the rains. The structure is made of earth, timber, stone, woven materials, and enormous faith in maintenance. Hands pack clay into gaps, feet stamp it down. A supervisor tests the flow with a pole. The touch of wet mud is cold at first, then strangely warm as it clings to skin. Mosquitoes whine near your ears with the persistence of tiny tax collectors, which feels appropriate. Rice irrigation can bind communities together, but it can also expose inequality. Those upstream may control water before it reaches those below. Wealthier households may command more labour. States may demand corvée work, forcing common people to dig, haul, and repair without much choice. A canal can nourish a valley, but it can also become a line along which power travels. Water looks gentle until someone owns the gate. Scholars continue to debate how much large irrigation systems created centralised states, and how much states expanded later by taking control of irrigation that local communities had already managed. In some regions, village cooperation may have been the foundation. In others, royal authority helped organise ambitious works. The relationship between rice, water, and empire is tangled, because human beings rarely build anything for only one reason. You move through a royal capital supported by the fields beyond it. The streets smell of cooked rice, oil, animals, incense, and dust warmed by sun. Officials pass with documents. Soldiers eat from bowls in shaded courtyards. Artisans carve, weave, cast, paint, and build because farmers somewhere have produced enough surplus to feed hands that are not currently planting. Palaces and temples may rise from stone and timber, but their unseen foundation is grain. Yet the field remains the centre. You return to the paddies in late afternoon. Water shines between rows of rice. Farmers bend to weed, their fingers moving beneath the surface, finding unwanted plants by touch. The mud is silky and resistant. Leeches may lurk in some places, because history never misses a chance to add discomfort. Birds circle overhead, waiting for insects or loose grain. The air is warm, wet, and heavy with the smell of growth. A tax collector arrives at harvest time. Nobody cheers, which is surprising to absolutely no one. Bundles of rice are counted, shares are divided. Some grain stays with the household, some goes to landlord, temple, ruler, or state granary. The exact system changes across time and place, but the feeling is familiar relief at the harvest, worry over what remains, calculation behind every basket. As evening settles, the canal reflects a red sky. Gates are closed. Water slows. Workers rinse tools and legs at the bank. A buffalo flicks its ears. From a nearby home, steam rises from a cooking pot, carrying the soft smell of rice becoming supper. The empire may issue commands, count grain, and carve its victories into stone, but the day ends here, beside mud and water, where ordinary hands have kept the system alive. You listen to the canal in the dark. It murmurs through the fields like a secret shared by rulers and farmers, though not always fairly. Rice has drawn people into cooperation, discipline, invention, and control. It has made landscapes productive and governments hungry. It has filled bowls and storehouses, lifted temples, paid soldiers, and taught whole societies that whoever manages water may manage life itself. The night air cools, frogs begin their chorus from the wet margins. Your fingers still remember the rough canal bank and the slick mud pressed into leaks. The grain growing quietly nearby seems delicate, almost innocent. Yet around it, empires learn to count, command, build, and endure. You walk into ancient India beneath a sky heavy with monsoon clouds, where the land seems to wait with its whole body for rain. The air is warm against your face, thick with the smell of damp dust, cow dung fuel, flowering trees, and distant smoke. A peacock cries from somewhere beyond the fields, sounding both majestic and slightly offended. The village path is soft beneath your feet, and the earth, darkened by recent showers, clings to your soles as if reluctant to let you pass. Rice grows here in many landscapes, but it loves the eastern plains, the river valleys, the wet lowlands, and the regions where seasonal rain arrives with force. You stand near a field where young plants shine green in shallow water. The surface trembles under falling drops. Each circle of rain spreads outward, touching another, then another, until the paddy becomes a silver skin of movement. Farmers move carefully through it, their garments hitched above the knees, their hands pressing seedlings into mud with a rhythm older than any palace wall. A mainstream historical fact takes root in this scene. Rice was cultivated in the Indian subcontinent in ancient times, and became especially important in the Ganges basin in eastern India, while other grains such as wheat, barley, and millets remained important in different regions. India was never a one-grain story. Its food history is a wide-woven mat, with rice, pulses, wheat, bala, sesame, millet, vegetables, milk, spices, and many wild foods crossing in complex patterns. Rice becomes central in some places, companionable in others, and ceremonial almost everywhere it is loved. You pass a cluster of houses made of wood, thatch, mud, and packed earth. Smoke curls from low openings, cattle shift in the shade, flicking flies with their tails. A woman rinses rice in a clay bowl, turning the grains with her fingers as cloudy water swirls away. The sound is soft, like sand under a stream. Near the hearth, a pot warms slowly. Steam rises, carrying a mild, sweet scent. Someone adds lentils, or perhaps spices, or vegetables gathered from nearby land. The meal is simple, filling, and deeply practical. In ancient Indian texts, rice appears with many names and forms. Sanskrit literature and later regional traditions refer to rice in daily life, ritual, medicine, and poetry. The grain can be cooked as plain food, made into cakes, mixed with milk, offered in sacrifice course or prepared for guests. You hear the echo of recitation from a shaded space where students repeat lines after a teacher, their voices low and steady. Palm leaves rustle. Oil lamps smell faintly nutty. Outside, the fields drink rain. Rice enters ritual life in ancient India with particular force. It may appear in offerings, rites of passage, marriage customs, and ceremonies linked to prosperity and purity. Grains are small, but they are countable, visible, and full of life potential. A handful of rice can become a blessing. A cooked dish can become an offering. A bowl placed before a guest can become hospitality. In a culture where food, duty, purity, and social order often intertwine, rice is never just stomach business. Though the stomach is certainly a persuasive philosopher, you step toward a larger settlement along a river route. Boats move slowly on brown water, carrying goods, people, and rumours. which have always travelled efficiently. The river smells of silt, fish, wet rope, and flowers left as offerings. Along the banks, you see baskets of grain, bundles of firewood, jars of clarified butter, and cloth dyed in warm colours. Rice moves through markets in measured amounts. It can be bought, sold, stored, cooked, gifted, taxed, or served to workers. Grain gives weight to exchange. A quirky tidbit shines from the kitchen side of history, one of the beloved rice preparations of South Asia. The soft mixture of rice and lentils, often known in later forms as khichdi or khichri, has very old roots as a practical, comforting food. It is gentle on the stomach, adaptable, and nearly impossible to make sound glamorous, which may be part of its charm. A dish does not need dramatic flair when it has been quietly feeding people for centuries. You sit beneath a tree while rain begins again. The leaves above you patter softly. The smell of wet bark mixes with the warm scent of cooked grain drifting from the house nearby. A child carries a small bowl, blowing across it before eating. The steam touches their cheeks. A dog watches with tragic hope. The rice is soft enough to press between fingers. It clings, warms, and satisfies. Agriculture here depends on water, but not always in the same way. Some rice fields rely on monsoon rains. Others use tanks, ponds, canals, wells, or river overflow. In parts of ancient India, water management becomes a serious skill, shaped by local ecology and social organisation. Farmers learn which lands hold moisture, which soils crack, which varieties tolerate flood, and which harvests can be risked when clouds behave suspiciously. Rain is a blessing, but also a negotiation. Rice also has a social life. It appears in feasts, household meals, temple offerings, and food rules that differ across communities. Who cooks, who serves, who eats with whom, and what is considered pure or appropriate can matter intensely. A grain may be small, but once people attach meaning to food, it becomes large enough to carry identity. The cooking pot can be as revealing as a royal inscription, and often more honest. Scholars still debate the exact pathways by which rice cultivation developed in ancient India, especially the balance between influence from East Asian domesticated rice and local domestication or cultivation of South Asian rice varieties. Archaeobotanical remains, genetic studies, and ancient texts all offer clues, but the story remains layered. Some evidence suggests interaction between different rice traditions over long periods. The result is not a tidy arrow on a map, but a braided history of movement, selection, and adaptation. You move into a courtly setting, where rice arrives not as muddy labour but as polished food. The floor is cool beneath your feet, lamps glow against painted walls. Servants carry dishes fragrant with ghee, herbs, and spices. Rice may accompany meat, vegetables, milk sweets, or sauces depending on region, period, and household custom. Elite tables can turn grain into refinement, but the same crop still depends on farmers whose hands know mud far better than gold. In medical and philosophical traditions, food is often discussed in relation to balance, health, temperament, and discipline. Rice can be considered nourishing, gentle, suitable for certain conditions, or appropriate for particular diets. Different types may be valued differently. Old, new, husked, parched, boiled, or prepared with milk. Each form can carry its own meaning. The grain becomes part of thinking about the body, not just feeding it. Ancient people, it turns out, were also very capable of having strong opinions about digestion. Evening settles across the fields. The monsoon clouds loosen into purple shadow. Frogs call from ditches. A bullock bell rings slowly as animals return along the path. The wet earth cools under your feet. In one house, rice is being served. In another grain is being measured for storage. At a shrine, a small offering rests beside flowers. Near the river, traders cover their baskets against night damp. You hold a warm handful of cooked rice and feel how easily it yields. It carries rain, river silt, household care, sacred gesture, market value, and regional memory. In ancient India, rice is not alone, but where it takes hold, it becomes intimate and enduring. It feeds labourers and scholars, villagers and nobles, children and elders. It enters chants, kitchens, remedies, and rituals. It belongs to mud and mantra, appetite and offering, the field and the fire. The night grows soft, smoke lowers over the village, rain taps gently on thatch, and somewhere in the darkness, a pot lid rattles as steam escapes. The grain rests in bowls, quiet and fragrant, holding the warmth of a land where water, season, and human hands have turned rice into a daily form of grace. You enter Japan through the soft gleam of a flooded field, where the morning sky lies flat on the water and rice seedlings rise like fine green brushstrokes. Mist drifts along the lowlands. A heron stands perfectly still, pretending to be a wise old official. The air smells of wet soil, straw, cedar smoke, and sea wind carried faintly from beyond the hills. Under your feet, the path is narrow and firm, raised above the paddies by packed earth that has known many careful steps. Rice in Japan becomes more than food. It becomes order, status, measurement, memory, and ceremony. A mainstream historical fact stands clearly here. Wet rice agriculture expanded in Japan during the Yayoi period, bringing new farming methods, storage practices, social changes, and eventually stronger distinctions of wealth and power. Rice helped reshape settlement life, encouraging communities to remain close to fields, water sources, storage buildings, and one another, which is convenient for farming and less convenient for avoiding village gossip. You walk toward a cluster of raised granaries. Their wooden posts lift the storage floors above damp ground and hungry animals. The wood feels rough beneath your fingers. The air inside is dry, dusty, and faintly sweet with husk and straw. Grain stored here is not simply future food. It is security. It is prestige. It is something that can be counted, guarded, exchanged, offered, and used to bind people into obligation. Nearby, farmers tend a paddy under a pale sun. The water is cool around their calves. Seedlings slide into the mud one after another, each placed with the kind of attention that looks simple only to someone not doing the work. Frogs click from the edges. Insects buzz lazily. The field reflects bodies bent in labour, and the reflection trembles whenever a foot shifts. Rice farming teaches rhythm: prepare, flood, plant, weed, drain, harvest, dry, thresh, store, cook. It is a calendar written in mud. As centuries turn, rice becomes woven into Japanese political life. Land capable of producing rice gains special importance. Later, during the medieval and early modern periods, rice yield becomes a major way to measure wealth and authority. In the Tokugawa era, domains are assessed in koku, a unit associated with the amount of rice considered enough to feed one person for a year. Imagine being valued not by gold coins, not by a flashy palace, but by how many yearly stomachs your land can support. Frankly, it is a very practical kind of bragging. You pass into a samurai residence where polished floors smell faintly of wood and oil. Outside, the paddies shimmer. Inside, status floats quietly in the arrangement of space, clothing, swords, and speech. Yet beneath the dignity, rice remains the accounting language of power. Samurai stipends can be calculated in rice. Lords measure their domains through rice productivity. The warrior class may cultivate an image of discipline and refinement, but someone still has to make sure the grain arrives. Honor is lovely. Dinner is persuasive. In a market town, rice changes hands with a softer but equally serious energy. Porters carry sacks. Merchants inspect grain quality, rubbing kernels between finger and thumb. The smell is dry straw, sweat, fish, ink, and hot tea from a stall nearby. Voices rise and fall in negotiation. Rice can move from countryside to city, from farmers to officials, from warehouses to kitchens. In time, rice brokers and merchants become powerful, because a society that measures wealth in grain must deal with the people who move that grain around. The ledger, as usual, quietly joins the sword at the table. A quirky tidbit waits in the cup rather than the bowl sake. The famous Japanese rice brew depends on a mould called koji that helps convert rice starch into sugars for fermentation. So the elegant drink served in a tiny cup owes its existence to carefully managed fungus. Very refined fungus, certainly, but fungus all the same. History has a way of keeping luxury humble when you look closely enough. Rice also lives in ritual. You stand near a Shinto shrine where the air is clean and cool beneath tall trees. A rope hangs before the sacred space. Paper streamers stir in a light wind. Offerings include rice, sake, salt, and other foods, placed with careful respect. Rice can symbolize purity, fertility, gratitude, and connection to divine forces. The emperor's ritual relationship with rice, especially in ceremonies connected to harvest and enthronement, reflects how deeply the grain is tied to ideas of order and continuity. In a village festival, rice becomes sound and movement. Drums beat, flutes call, people gather in clothing bright against the muted fields. Rice cakes are pounded with wooden mallets, the rhythm deep and satisfying. Thump, turn, thump, turn. Steam rises from the sticky mass, warm and sweet, filling the air with a smell that wraps around you like a blanket. Mochi looks soft and innocent, but anyone who has watched it being pounded knows it arrives through teamwork, speed, and a healthy respect for fingers. At the household hearth, rice becomes intimate again. A pot sits over heat. Steam lifts the lid with tiny sighs. The cooked grains are glossy, tender, and slightly sticky, holding together just enough for chopsticks. The room smells of miso, pickles, grilled fish, smoke, and warm rice. A family gathers. No one announces that this bowl carries centuries of agricultural policy, ritual meaning, and social hierarchy. They eat because they are hungry. History often enters the mouth without making a speech. Yet rice was not always eaten equally. For many common people in different periods, especially poorer households, pure white rice could be rare or reserved for special occasions, while daily meals might include barley, millet, vegetables, or mixed grains. Polished white rice later became associated with refinement, but refinement has a habit of removing nutrients. In some urban settings, heavy reliance on polished rice contributed to beriberi, a disease linked to thiamine deficiency. A beautiful bowl can hide a nutritional trap. Very rude of beauty, but there it is. Scholars still argue over the pace and character of rice's earlier spread through the Japanese islands. Some emphasize migration and cultural transmission from the Korean peninsula into northern Kyushu, while others study how local communities adapted, or resisted new farming lifeways. Archaeology shows change, but people do not change their meals, houses, tools, and rituals all at once because a new crop politely arrives. They negotiate with it, season by season. You return to the fields at sunset. The paddies are no longer bright green, but deep gold. Heavy heads of rice bend toward the water. Farmers cut stalks and tie them into bundles. Straw scratches your hands when you lift one. The smell is dry, warm, and nutty. Crickets begin their evening music. Smoke curls from houses beyond the fields, and a bell sounds somewhere far away, soft enough to feel like memory. In Japan, rice is a crop, a measure, a tax, a ritual offering, a drink, a cake, a daily bowl, and a symbol of belonging. It feeds bodies and organizes society. It stands in wet fields with muddy roots, yet reaches into shrine courtyards, warrior accounts, merchant warehouses, and family kitchens. Night lowers over the paddy water. The last light rests on the grain heads and then fades. You feel the cool air settle against your skin and hear the whisper of stalks moving in the dark. The rice waits in the field, quiet and golden, carrying the weight of a country's labour without asking to be admired. You glide into Southeast Asia by water, which is really the most honest entrance. The land does not always separate itself neatly from rivers, ponds, swamps, rain channels, and flooded fields. It mingles, it reflects, it shifts under clouds so large they seem to have their own intentions. The air is warm and soft on your skin, full of damp green smells, banana leaves, river mud, coconut husk, wood smoke, fish sauce, wet bamboo, and rice steaming somewhere behind a woven wall. Here, rice grows in water worlds. It grows beside boats, under stilt houses, near spirit shrines, along deltas, in upland clearings, and across plains that shimmer after rain. You hear paddles dipping into brown water with a sleepy rhythm. You hear frogs tucked into the edges of paddies. You hear rain beginning on palm leaves, first as scattered taps, then as a rushing curtain. Nothing here feels still for long. The sky moves, the rivers move, the fields fill and drain, and people move with them. A mainstream historical fact sits gently beneath the scene. Southeast Asia became one of the great rice-growing regions of the world, with wet rice in lowlands and deltas, upland rice in hill regions, and countless local varieties adapted to different climates, soils, and cultural traditions. There is no single Southeast Asian rice story. There are many Thai jasmine rice, Laos sticky rice, Vietnamese delta rice, Cambodian wetfield rice, Indonesian sour systems, Philippine terraces and lowland paddies, and island varieties tucked into places maps often ignore. You step into a village built above seasonal water. Houses stand on posts, their floors raised to meet floods with calm practicality. Beneath them, chickens scratch when the ground is dry. Dogs sleep in strips of shade, and boats wait like patient wooden animals. A woman rinses rice in a basin, turning it with one hand until the water clouds white. Nearby, fish dry on a rack in the sun, their salty smell mingling with smoke and the sweet green scent of pandan leaves. A child leans over the rail to watch tiny fish flicker below. In the lowlands, rice fields become part of a living aquatic system. When paddies flood, they invite more than rice. Fish, snails, crabs, frogs, insects, and edible plants may share the water. Farmers know which creatures are welcome, which are pests, and which are dinner quietly presenting itself between the stems. The paddy is a field, yes, but also a wet pantry, a nursery, a mirror, and occasionally a mosquito convention with terrible manners. You walk along a raised bund between fields. The mud is firm in some places and treacherous in others. Your toes grip the path. Water presses against both sides, reflecting the sky. Young rice plants tremble in rows, their green tips bright after rain. A farmer bends to pull weeds from beneath the surface, feeling through mud by touch. Another checks a bamboo water gate, adjusting flow with a few clumps of clay and leaves. These gestures are small, but they hold the season together. In mainland river deltas, especially places like the Mekong and Red River regions, rice can shape entire ways of living. Villages face canals, markets float or cluster near boat landings. Rice moves in baskets, sacks, barges, and memories of harvest. The river road is sometimes more important than the land road. You sit in a narrow boat as it slips past houses, fruit trees, drying nets, and fields where water buffalo stand belly deep, looking ancient, patient, and faintly unimpressed by human ambition. A quirky tidbit rises from the cookhouse in Laos and parts of northeastern Thailand. Sticky rice has often been eaten by hand, rolled into small balls and dipped into sauces or eaten with grilled foods. The rice is not merely a side dish, it is an edible utensil, very efficient, very satisfying, and far less likely to be misplaced than a spoon, unless lunch goes extremely wrong. Rice here is also social glue. It appears in household meals, temple offerings, ancestor rites, planting ceremonies, harvest festivals, and everyday greetings. In some languages and cultures of the region, eating rice can stand in for eating a meal itself. The grain becomes so central that asking whether someone has eaten may really mean, has rice entered your day? Has life continued properly? Are you still held by ordinary comfort? You step into an upland clearing where rice grows without standing water. The atmosphere is different. The field is drier, cut from forest or hillside, with ash darkening the soil. Smoke hangs in the air after burning, sharp and woody. Seeds are dibbled into the ground with pointed sticks. The work follows another rhythm, tied to shifting cultivation, fallow cycles, forest knowledge, and hill community traditions. Upland rice may be less visually famous than shining paddies, but it carries deep histories of mobility, adaptation, and intimate knowledge of slopes, rain, and soil. Scholars still debate how best to understand the balance between lowland wet rice expansion and upland rice traditions in Southeast Asian history. Some older interpretations treated wet rice states as the main story and hill farming as a leftover from the past, but many researchers now emphasize the diversity, resilience, and sophistication of upland systems. The question is not simply which came first or which is more advanced. That is the sort of question history sighs at. The better question is how different communities use different landscapes to survive. You enter a temple courtyard at dusk. Incense curls into the humid air. Monks, elders, or ritual specialists may receive rice offerings. Bowls are carried with both hands. The cooked grains smell warm and faintly sweet. In Buddhist settings, rice given to monks becomes merit, generosity, discipline, and community support all at once. In other traditions, rice may be offered to local spirits, ancestors, or guardian beings who watch over fields and homes. The sacred and the practical sit comfortably together, as they often do when crops are involved. Night spreads over the water, lamps glow in houses on stilts. A pot lid rattles gently as steam escapes. Frogs begin their chorus, joined by insect and the distant putter of a boat engine in a more recent century. A bowl is placed before you, filled with rice that holds the scent of rain, river, smoke, and patient hands. Southeast Asian rice is never only one grain in one field. It is floating markets and mountain clearings, temple mornings and family evenings, buffalo tracks and boat wakes, sticky handfuls and fragrant steam. It belongs to water that rises, land that adapts, and people who know how to live where the two keep speaking to each other. You follow rice westward along roads scented with dust, spice, camel sweat, sea salt, and cooking smoke. The grain travels through a world of merchants, farmers, scholars, sailors, cooks, gardeners, and rulers who know the value of anything that can fill a bowl and survive a journey. It moves across mountains and deserts, around ports and river mouths, through markets where languages overlap like woven cloth. The air changes as you walk. The wet green fields of Asia give way to drier valleys, irrigated gardens, caravan towns, and cities where water is precious enough to be praised in poetry. You hear hooves on packed earth, the creak of wooden wheels, the groan of ropes around cargo, the call to prayer rising over rooftops, and the steady splash of water lifted from a canal. Rice has entered the Islamic world, and here it will be studied, planted, traded, perfumed, sweetened, spiced, and turned into dishes that travel almost as widely as the grain itself. A mainstream historical fact is clear rice spread through Persian, Arab, Central Asian, North African, and Mediterranean regions through trade, conquest, farming knowledge, and irrigation networks associated with the expansion of Islamic civilization. The crop was not equally important everywhere, because rice needs water and the world is not always generous with it. But where irrigation worked, and where climate allowed, rice became a valued food, a commercial crop, and a delight of sophisticated kitchens. You stand in a Persian garden where channels of water divide the earth into careful geometry. The sound is soft and cooling, a thin running music over stone. Cypress trees cast narrow shadows. The smell of damp soil rises beneath rose petals, herbs, and fruit. In such a world, controlling water is an art as much as a technique. Rice fields may not sit inside the formal garden itself, of course, unless someone has made a very damp landscaping decision. But the same cultural respect for water supports the farming systems that allow rice to grow in dry regions. In Iran and Central Asia, rice finds places along river valleys, oases, and irrigated plains. Farmers prepare fields where water can be guided and held. The mud feels different from tropical paddies, often cooler in the morning, drying faster at the edges, more dependent on channels and snowmelt rivers. The scent of the field mingles with dust from the road, sheep wool, dung fuel, and the bright freshness of herbs carried from market gardens. You enter a town bazaar. It is crowded but not frantic. Sacks of rice lean against baskets of dates, lentils, almonds, raisins, saffron, cumin, coriander, and dried limes. Metalworkers hammer in a side alley. A seller lifts a handful of long grains and lets them fall back into the sack with a faint, dry hiss. Shoppers judge quality by length, fragrance, colour, and cleanliness. Rice here is not merely bulk food. Fine rice can be a mark of refinement, a grain worthy of careful cooking and generous hospitality. A quirky tidbit waits inside the kitchen in Persian cooking. Rice can be prepared so that the bottom forms a crisp golden crust known as tadig. This cherished layer is sometimes the most fought-over part of the meal. A dish built around soft grains somehow creates a crunchy prize at the bottom of the pot. Humans, being predictable in the best way, immediately turned it into a matter of pride and quiet competition. You step into a kitchen where rice is being washed, soaked, parboiled, drained, steamed, and perfumed with saffron. Steam fogs the air. The pot lid is wrapped in cloth to catch condensation. Butter or oil warms in the bottom, giving off a nutty smell. The rice must be tender but separate, fragrant but not heavy. A cook lifts the lid, and a cloud rises, carrying saffron, steam, and the gentle sweetness of grain. The room grows quiet for a moment, because even talkative people respect a good pot of rice. Rice also enters Arab cuisines through trade routes and agricultural exchange. In cities from Baghdad to Damascus, Cairo to Cordoba, cooks combine rice with meat, broth, spices, nuts, fruits, and sweeteners. Rice can become pilaf, pudding, porridge, stuffing, festive dish, or simple sustenance. In medical and agricultural texts, scholars discuss foods, plants, irrigation, soils, and cultivation methods. The Islamic Golden Age is often remembered for mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and medicine, all very impressive, certainly. But it also included practical knowledge about crops, gardens, and how to keep people fed, which is the less glamorous but highly necessary side of brilliance. You walk through Abbasid Baghdad in imagination, near the great rivers that make the city possible. The Tigris moves broad and brown under the sun. Boats carry grain, timber, textiles, and news. The markets smell of bread, sesame oil, roasted meat, ink, leather, and spices. Rice dishes appear on elite tables and in humbler forms among ordinary people, depending on availability and price. A scholar may debate philosophy by day and enjoy rice cooked in broth by evening, proving once again that the mind works better when the stomach is not filing complaints. From the Middle East, rice travels into North Africa and Al-Andalus, in irrigated parts of Muslim Spain. Rice cultivation becomes part of a wider agricultural landscape that includes citrus, sugarcane, cotton, vegetables, and new techniques of water management. You stand near fields in Valencia, where channels bring water across dry land. The air smells of orange blossom, damp soil, and warm stone. Farmers open and close gates according to careful rules. Water rights matter deeply, because one person's generous flooding can become another person's very dry disappointment. Scholars still debate the exact timing and scale of rice cultivation in some Western Islamic regions, especially how much was grown locally versus imported through trade. Written records, place names, agricultural manuals, and archaeology offer clues. But rice leaves a patchy trail in dry archives and wetter fields. It is clear that Islamic networks helped carry rice and rice knowledge widely, yet the details shift from region to region like sunlight on irrigation water. Rice also moves by sea. You hear gulls crying over a port, ropes creaking, jars clinking, sailors shouting as cargo is loaded. The smell is salt, tar, dried fish, spices, and damp grain sacks. Ports connect the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean. Rice travels with pepper, textiles, sugar, ceramics, and stories. It is heavy, useful, and tradable, not as flashy as silk, but considerably more comforting when you are hungry after a long voyage. In households, rice becomes a guest at many tables. It absorbs broth in savoury dishes, thickens milk puddings, stretches meat for family meals, and carries the fragrance of cinnamon, cardamom, rosewater, saffron, or dates. Sweet rice dishes become associated with celebration and comfort. A bowl of rice pudding cools in the evening air, its surface shining faintly, scented with milk and spice. A child waits nearby with the heroic patience of someone who has been told it is not ready yet. You pause at sunset beside an irrigation channel. The day's heat lifts from the earth. Water moves through the stone-lined path with a low, steady murmur. The rice fields beyond are green where the land would otherwise lean toward dust. This is the quiet wonder of the crop's western journey. Rice enters places where water must be summoned, lifted, divided, defended, and cherished. It becomes a grain of engineering as much as agriculture. Night settles over the town, lamps glow in courtyards. Somewhere, rice steams under a cloth-wrapped lid. Somewhere else, a merchant closes a sack and ties it with practiced hands. The Islamic world does not merely receive rice, it transforms it, writes about it, trades it, perfumes it, and sends it onward in dishes that will echo across continents. The grain rests in a bowl, long and fragrant, touched by saffron light. Around it gather canals, caravans, gardens, ports, scholars, cooks, and the patient mathematics of water. Rice has crossed into new climates and new imaginations, and it carries with it the soft power of a food that knows how to become local without forgetting the road. You enter medieval Europe through a market gate, where the stones are damp, the alleys are narrow, and the air carries an ambitious mixture of smells. There is smoke from hearths, wool wet from rain, horse sweat, onions, river mud, stale beer, fresh bread, and somewhere among it all, a faint dry scent from a sack of imported rice. It is not the main food here, not yet. Wheat, rye, barley, oats, peas, beans, cabbages, and pottage fill most bowls. Rice arrives like a foreign guest with good manners and expensive luggage. You walk past stalls crowded with rough loaves, salted fish, cheeses, herbs, candles, and bolts of cloth. A merchant lifts a small measure of rice from a bag and lets it spill through his fingers. The grains are pale and unfamiliar to many shoppers. Some have heard of it through trade, some have tasted it in a wealthy household. Some think of it as medicinal, delicate, exotic, or suitable for special dishes. Rice does not yet belong to every kitchen in Europe. It belongs to ports, courts, monasteries, physicians, and people who can afford to be curious at supper. A mainstream historical fact sits firmly in this scene. Rice reached medieval Europe through trade with the Islamic world and Mediterranean cultivation, especially in regions such as Spain and Italy, where climate and irrigation could support it. In northern Europe, it was often imported and costly, more common among elites than ordinary peasants. A grain that fed millions elsewhere becomes, in many European towns, a luxury ingredient. History enjoys these reversals. One person's daily staple is another person's fancy dinner surprise. You step into a monastery kitchen. The room is warm, smoky, and orderly in that slightly stern monastic way. Iron pots hang over the fire. Wooden tables are worn smooth. Herbs dry from beams. A cook stirs something pale and thick in a pot. Perhaps rice with almond milk. Perhaps a dish meant for a feast day, an invalid, or a noble guest. The steam smells of grain, nuts, and faint sweetness. Outside, rain taps on the roof. Inside, the spoon moves slowly, scraping the bottom so nothing burns. Even holiness appreciates not ruining the pot. Rice appears in medieval European medical writing as well as cookery. Physicians influenced by classical and Arabic learning discussed foods in terms of humours, qualities, digestion, and balance. Rice could be considered binding, gentle, or useful in certain conditions, depending on preparation and interpretation. You might find it recommended for the sick, cooked into soft dishes with milk or almond milk. Medieval medicine could be strange, certainly, but the instinct to feed a tired body something warm and soft is easy to understand. In a noble household, rice becomes part of display. You enter a hall lit by candles, with tapestries stirring slightly in the cold draught. The rushes on the floor smell grassy beneath the scents of roasted meat, wine, wax, and spice. Servants carry dishes arranged to impress. Rice may be sweetened with sugar, coloured with saffron, enriched with milk, almond milk, or broth, or paired with expensive spices. It is not just food, it is proof that the household can reach beyond its fields into trade routes crossing sea and desert. A quirky tidbit glows golden in the bowl. Saffron rice appears in medieval, European elite cooking because saffron gave both colour and status. The yellow stain suggested richness, warmth, and expense. It is almost charming how humans looked at a pale grain and thought, nice, but could it look more like money? Naturally, saffron answered yes, if you could pay for it. You travel south to the rice fields of medieval Spain. The air warms, irrigation channels cut through the land, glinting beneath sun. Water murmurs past stone and earth banks into fields where rice can grow under careful management. The smell is wet soil, reeds, animals, and warm air rising from the plain. In Al-Andalus and later Christian Iberia, rice cultivation persists in suitable regions, though it can be controversial where standing water is associated with unhealthy air or fever. The field feeds people, but it also worries them. Very human to admire abundance and fear the puddle that produces it. Italy also becomes important in Europe's rice story, particularly in the north where wetlands, rivers, and irrigation systems support cultivation. You stand in the Po Valley, where flat land stretches under a broad sky. The soil is heavy, water gathers in channels and fields. Farmers work in damp conditions that are productive but uncomfortable. Mosquitoes rise in clouds with the enthusiasm of an unpaid choir. Rice will become deeply important here over time, helping shape regional cuisine and agriculture. Scholars still debate the precise pace of rice's spread into different parts of medieval Europe and how common it was among various social classes. Cookbooks and trade records show elite use, while agricultural evidence points to cultivation in selected regions, but everyday consumption among poorer households varied greatly. Written sources often preserve the meals of the literate and wealthy, which is convenient for historians and deeply unfair to everyone eating ordinary pottage in silence. You enter a port city where rice arrives by ship. Dock workers unload sacks, jars, wool, wine, spices, cloth, and metal goods. Ropes creak. Gulls scream overhead. The harbour smells of salt, tar, fish guts, wet wood, and foreign cargo. A trader inspects grain for dampness, pests, and quality. Rice must survive the journey. If moisture gets in, it spoils. If rats find it, congratulations. The rats have joined the feast. Commerce is glamorous only from a distance. In town kitchens, rice is adapted to local habits. It can be boiled into thick dishes, sweetened for special occasions, added to soups, or used in preparations connected to Lent and fasting, when animal products may be restricted, depending on rules and region. Almond milk becomes useful in such cooking, offering richness without dairy. The combination of rice, almond milk, sugar, and spice becomes a gentle luxury, soft enough for the ill, refined enough for the wealthy, and comforting enough to make a cold stone room feel briefly kind. You pass a peasant cottage where rice is absent. The pot over the fire holds grains and vegetables from nearby fields, perhaps barley, oats, beans, leeks, or cabbage. This absence matters. The history of rice in medieval Europe is not only about where it appears, but where it does not. For many people, rice remains distant, something heard of from towns or tasted rarely if ever. Bread still rules much of Europe's table. Pottage does the daily work. Rice waits at the edges, slowly finding places to grow and recipes to enter. Evening settles over the market. The rice merchant ties his sacks. A monk closes a kitchen door. A noble table is cleared, leaving traces of spice and grain on wooden boards. In a southern field, water glimmers in the fading light, and frogs begin their small, persistent songs. Rice has crossed into Europe, but it wears a different face here, rare, costly, medicinal, elegant, sometimes suspect, sometimes treasured. You hold a spoonful of warm rice cooked with almond milk. It is soft, pale, and faintly sweet, a dish more delicate than the rough breads beside it. It carries the memory of trade routes, Islamic agriculture, monastic kitchens, noble taste, and wet European fields still learning the grain's demands. In medieval Europe, rice is not yet the humble everyday bowl. It is a traveller, a luxury, a medicine, a curiosity, and a promise waiting in the damp lands of the south. You step into West Africa at the edge of a broad river. where the water moves slowly through reeds, palms, mudflats, and fields bright with grain. The air is warm, rich, and layered with scent wet earth. Wood smoke, drying fish, palm oil, cattle, and grasses ripening under the sun. A breeze moves across the floodplain, and the rice heads stir with a dry whisper, soft as cloth being folded in another room. Here, another great rice story grows. It is often overshadowed by Asian rice, but it is not a footnote. West Africa has its own ancient domesticated rice, known to scholars as Oryza glaberrima. It was cultivated for thousands of years in regions linked to the inland Niger Delta, the Upper Niger, Senegambia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and other wetland and savanna zones. This African rice is a different domesticated species from Asian rice, shaped by African farmers for African landscapes, and it deserves to stand in the light without politely waiting behind anyone else. You walk along a low field near a seasonal floodplain. The mud under your feet is warm at the surface and cool beneath. Small crabs vanish into holes. Birds call from epaphras and tall grasses. Farmers move through the field with baskets, knives, and quiet focus. The rice plants look slightly different from many Asian varieties. African rice can be hardy, quick to mature, and well adapted to difficult conditions, including fluctuating water and poor soils. It is not always the highest yielding, especially by modern standards, but it carries resilience like a quiet talent. A mainstream historical fact rests here with dignity. African rice was independently domesticated in West Africa, making the region one of the world's major original centres of rice cultivation. This matters because it reminds you that agriculture did not come from one place or one people. Human beings in many landscapes observed plants, selected seeds, shaped fields, and built food systems with patience and skill. West African rice farmers were not simply recipients of someone else's agricultural genius. They were agricultural innovators in their own right. You enter a village where rice is being processed in the shade. Women pound grain in tall wooden mortars, lifting pestles and dropping them in a rhythm that seems to join the heartbeat of the place. Thump, lift, thump, lift. The sound travels between houses and trees. Chaff rises in pale dust. The smell is dry husk, sweat, smoke, and warm grain. Children sweep scattered kernels carefully, because wasted rice is never just mess. It is lost labour. Nearby, rice cooks in a pot over a fire. The steam is earthy and faintly nutty. It may be prepared plain, mixed with leafy sauces, fish, meat, palm oil, spices, or fermented ingredients depending on region and household. The grains hold local taste and local memory. Food here is not a museum display. It is alive, flexible, and deeply tied to family, ecology, and season. A cook tastes, pauses, adds something, and tastes again. The pot has the final authority, as pots often do. West African rice systems are wonderfully varied. Some farmers grow rice in tidal estuaries where salt and fresh water must be carefully managed. Others plant in inland floodplains, rain-fed lowlands, upland fields, or mangrove zones. In coastal areas, especially among peoples of Upper Guinea, farmers developed sophisticated ways to clear mangrove swamps, build bunds, manage tidal flows, and grow rice in landscapes that look impossible to anyone lacking local knowledge. The work is heavy, wet, and exacting. The reward is grain drawn from places where land and water argue daily. A quirky tidbit hides in the field African rice has seed heads that can shatter more easily than many modern cultivated types, meaning grains may fall when ripe. To harvest it well, farmers needed careful timing and technique. Imagine growing a crop that decides to leap away if you are late. It is useful, nourishing, and just a little dramatic, like a plant with strong opinions about punctuality. You follow a farmer into a mangrove rice landscape. The mud is dark and deep, gripping the legs. The smell is sharp with salt, decay, and green life. Mangrove roots twist like wooden fingers. Dikes hold back tides, and channels guide water. A gate may be opened or closed at the right moment to flush salts, admit fresh water, or drain fields. The farmer reads the tide, the rain, the soil, and the crop together. This is engineering without marble monuments, science without a laboratory coat, wisdom without needing to announce itself. Scholars still debate exactly when and where African rice domestication first began, and how different cultivation systems spread across West Africa. Some evidence points toward the inland Niger Delta as a major centre. While other regions show long and complex rice traditions of their own, plant remains are fragile. Wetland archaeology is difficult, and oral knowledge can preserve truths in forms that do not always match written categories. The past here is not silent. It speaks in grains, tools, fields, songs, and landscapes that still remember use. Rice also belongs to trade and community life. You stand in a market where women sell baskets of grain beside smoked fish, cola nuts, cloth, salt, peppers, gourds, and pottery. The air is lively with voices, bargaining, laughter, babies fussing, goats making unnecessary remarks, and the metallic ring of a tool being repaired nearby. Rice can be exchanged, gifted, cooked for guests, stored for lean times, or prepared for ceremonies. It holds both economic and social weight. In many West African societies, as rice farming knowledge was highly specialised. People knew which varieties suited deep water, which could handle drought, which matured early, which tasted best, which resisted pests, and which belonged to ritual occasions. This knowledge lived in hands and memory. It passed through families, apprenticeships, songs, work groups, and seasonal practice. A field was not merely planted, it was interpreted. You sit near the river as evening approaches. The light turns amber on the water. Canoes move slowly past, their paddles dipping with soft clicks. Smoke from cooking fires hangs low over the village. The rice fields glow, some green, some gold, some already harvested into stubble. Insects begin their thin evening music. The air cools just enough to make the warmth of a rice bowl feel welcome. African rice carries a hidden history because many later accounts minimized it, mistook it or folded it into stories centered elsewhere. Yet here it stands, rooted in West African soil and water. It fed communities, shaped wetlands, supported trade, and carried knowledge that would become tragically important across the Atlantic. It is not merely an old crop. It is evidence of observation, adaptation, courage, and long intimacy with difficult landscapes. You lift a handful of rough grain and feel its lightness. Each seed is small, but together they hold centuries of river floods, tidal gates, songs in the fields, market mornings, cooking smoke, and the quiet pride of farmers who learn their land deeply. West African rice does not need to shout. It rustles in the warm wind, steady and golden, reminding you that the history of food is wider than the stories most often told. You stand on the edge of an Atlantic tide marsh, where the water rises and falls with a slow, indifferent strength. The air is thick with salt, mud, mosquito wine, and the sweet rot of grass is left wet beneath the sun. Tall reeds sway in the breeze. The creek glints like dull silver. Beneath your feet, the ground feels uncertain, half land and half memory. Holding footprints for a moment before softening them away, rice has crossed the ocean into a harsher story. In the Atlantic world, it becomes tied to plantation wealth, colonial ambition, and forced labour. The grain itself remains innocent. Of course, rice does not choose suffering. But human systems can take a useful plant and wrap it in cruelty, profit, and control. Here, in the coastal lowlands of the Americas, especially in regions such as South Carolina, Georgia, and parts of the Caribbean and South America, rice cultivation becomes one of the crops shaped by slavery. A mainstream historical fact stands firmly in this marshland European colonists in the Americas built profitable rice plantations by exploiting enslaved African labour, and many enslaved Africans brought essential knowledge of rice cultivation from West African rice-growing regions. This knowledge mattered deeply, planting in wetlands, managing water, constructing embankments, using tidal flows, processing grain, and understanding difficult marsh ecology were not simple tasks. Colonists often depended on skills they did not possess, while denying freedom and dignity to the very people whose expertise made the system work. You walk along a raised embankment between flooded fields. The mud bank is rough beneath your hand, packed with shovel marks and roots. Water presses against one side, waiting behind a wooden trunk gate. The gate can admit or release tidal water when opened at the right moment. The smell is strong, brackish water, wet clay, decaying plants, sweat, and smoke from distant cabins. Birds lift suddenly from the reeds, wings beating the heavy air. The labour is exhausting. Enslaved workers clear swamps, cut trees, dig ditches, build banks, plant seed, weed fields, harvest, thresh, pound, winnow, and carry sacks. They stand in water for hours, bitten by insects, exposed to heat and disease. The soundscape is harsh and steady shovels striking mud, water slapping wooden gates, overseers calling, baskets creaking, and voices carrying across the fields in work songs, warnings, prayers, or quiet conversation. Rice fields can look beautiful from a distance, up close, under slavery. They are places of coercion and survival. You feel the humidity settle on your skin like a damp blanket. Mosquitoes gather with relentless enthusiasm, as if invited to a feast nobody else approved. Malaria and other illnesses haunt these wetlands. Planters often preferred to live away from the most dangerous fields when they could, leaving enslaved communities to bear the daily risks. The plantation system built wealth from distance, delegation, and violence, all while pretending the rice itself was merely a crop. Yet within this world, enslaved Africans and their descendants preserved knowledge, culture, and resistance. Rice cultivation was not only forced labour, it was also a space where African agricultural memory remained alive. Techniques from West African tidal rice systems may have influenced how fields were designed and managed in the Carolina Low Country. Basketry, processing methods, foodways, songs, language patterns, and community practices carried traces of African origins, transformed by suffering but not erased. A quirky tidbit rests in the tools of rice processing the fanner basket, used to toss pounded rice so wind could separate grain from chaff, has strong connections to West African basket traditions. The motion required skill. Too timid, and nothing separates. Too bold, and your rice may decorate the yard, which is not ideal unless feeding chickens was the plan. In practiced hands, the basket becomes almost musical, grain rising and falling in a pale arc. You enter a yard near the cabins after the day's fieldwork. Smoke curls from cooking fires. The smell of rice mingles with greens, fish, cornmeal, beans, and whatever can be grown, gathered, trapped, or saved. Enslaved families create meals under severe limits, using skill to stretch ingredients and preserve taste. A pod of rice can become nourishment, memory, and care. It can carry echoes of African dishes while adapting to American ingredients. Around the fire, the grain belongs again to people, not merely to plantation accounts. Rice plantations operate through water control, and water control requires timing. Wooden trunks, dikes, canals, and floodgates allow planters and enslaved workers to use tides to irrigate and drain fields. The system can be efficient, but it demands constant maintenance. Storms break banks, sediment clogs ditches, rats, birds, and weeds threaten crops. Every harvest rests on endless repair. The plantation owner may see profit. The workers feel the mud in their hands. Scholars still debate the degree to which American rice plantation techniques came directly from specific West African practices versus being adapted through a combination of African expertise, European experimentation, and local environmental learning. The question matters because older histories often credited planters too easily, while ignoring African knowledge. Today, many historians emphasize that enslaved Africans were not passive laborers in this story. They were skilled agriculturalists, cultural carriers, and people forced to build wealth for others while protecting fragments of their own worlds. You move toward a colonial port where barrels and sacks of rice are loaded for export. The dock smells of salt, tar, wet rope, grain dust, and human sweat. Ships creak against the tide, merchants count cargo. Rice leaves the marshes for tables in Europe and the Caribbean, becoming part of global trade. The polished grain may look clean and elegant when served far away, but it carries the hidden labour of wet fields, forced hands, and lives constrained by law and violence. There is no need to make this part of the story louder than it is. The marsh itself speaks. The buzz of insects, the slap of water, the heavy breath after labour, the soft scrape of a spoon in a cabin bowl, the creak of a ship carrying profit away. Rice fed people, but it also enriched enslavers. It sustained families, but it was used to deepen bondage. History can hold both truths, though it does not hold them comfortably. Evening falls across the tide fields. The water turns copper, then grey. Egrets step through the shallows with delicate feet. Smoke rises from scattered homes. Somewhere, someone sings low enough that the sound blends with frogs and reeds. You hold a few grains in your palm, and they feel almost weightless. But here, each grain carries the heaviness of an ocean crossing, stolen freedom, remembered skill and survival in a landscape where mud, water, and power were made to serve empire. The tide keeps moving. It enters the channels, touches the gates, and slips through the marsh grass as darkness gathers. Rice has become an Atlantic crop, but its story here is not only agriculture. It is knowledge taken across the sea, labour forced into profit, and human dignity enduring where the fields were deepest and the air hardest to breathe. You enter the Carolina low country at first light, where mist hangs above the tidal rivers and the marsh grass shines with silver dew. The air is soft, warm, and faintly salty. It smells of pluff mud, wet reeds, cypress wood, smoke, and rice drying somewhere beyond the trees. The landscape is flat, but never empty. Creeks twist through it. Birds step through the shallows. Water waits in every ditch and hollow, patient as a quiet accountant. This is the world of Carolina gold, the famous rice that helped make coastal South Carolina and Georgia wealthy in the 18th and 19th centuries. Its name sounds almost romantic, like something found in a pirate chest or served at a candlelit table by someone with excellent posture. But the gold was grain, and the wealth came from fields built through forced labour. The rice became prized for its quality, flavour, and cooking character, while the people who made it possible were denied ownership of their own lives. You walk along a tidal rice field divided by embankments, canals, and wooden gates. The morning water reflects a pale sky. The mud at the bank is cool under your fingers, slick and heavy. A trunk gate stands in the dike, built to control the flow of tide water in and out of the field. When opened, water slides through with a low rushing sound. When closed, the field holds its breath. The entire system depends on timing, pressure, and repair. It is farming as hydraulics, which is a grand word for people trying very hard to persuade a swamp to behave. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Carolina gold rice became one of the most important export crops of the colonial and antebellum Low Country, with production concentrated in tidal wetlands, where enslaved African and African American workers supplied the labour and expertise. The grain was shipped to markets across the Atlantic and helped create fortunes for plantation owners. It also fed households, shaped local cuisine, and left a deep imprint on regional identity. You move toward a plantation house set back from the marsh. It is raised, airy, and built to catch breezes. The rooms smell of polished wood, wax, linen, and food carried from the kitchen. On the table, rice appears as refinement separate grains, soft but not mushy, perhaps served with fish, gravy, vegetables, or game. Guests praise its texture, hosts praise their land, silver spoons touch porcelain. Outside, beyond the view carefully framed from the veranda, enslaved workers move through heat, insect, water, and disease to keep the fields producing. The contrast is difficult, and it should be. Rice in the dining room feels elegant. Rice in the field feels heavy. One world counts profit. The other feels the shovel handle blister the palm. One world discusses markets and manners. The other wakes before dawn to manage tides, mend banks, cut stalks, pound grain, and survive the season. History has many rooms, and they do not all smell the same. You step into the rice barn, where harvested stalks are stacked and processed. The air is dry, scratchy, and filled with dust. Loose husks cling to clothing. Wooden tools thump and scrape. Before industrial milling became common, rice processing required immense effort, threshing the grain from stalks, pounding away the hulls, winnowing chaff, and polishing or cleaning the kernels for market. The sound is repetitive, almost trance-like. Thud, sift, brush, breathe, thud, sift, brush, breathe. A quirky tidbit sits inside the name Carolina Gold itself. The word gold likely refers not only to wealth, but also to the golden colour of the rice in the field before harvest, when the mature heads bent under their own weight. A field ready to cut could look like sunlight growing from mud. Very poetic, though the crop still demanded painfully unpoetic labour. Carolina Gold also entered cooking traditions in ways that lasted long beyond the plantation economy. It became associated with dishes such as pilau, sometimes called perlo or perlo in regional speech, where rice cooks with broth, meat, seafood, vegetables, or seasonings. These dishes reflect African, European, indigenous, and Caribbean influences moving through low-country kitchens. A pot of pilau is not a simple recipe. It is a meeting place, a quiet archive with steam rising from the lid. You stand near an enslaved community's cooking fire in the evening. The air smells of rice, greens, smoked meat if available, fish, okra, peppers, corn, and wood smoke. A pot simmers low. Someone stirs slowly with a long spoon. Children listen to elders. A basket rests nearby, woven with skill, its pattern carrying memory in the hands. Food here is shaped by restriction, resilience, and knowledge, even under violent control. People preserve taste, share care, and make meaning from what can be gathered, grown, saved, or traded. Rice wealth also shaped towns such as Charleston, where merchants, brokers, millers, coopers, ship captains, and financiers profited from the crop. You walk through streets where carts rattle over stone and packed earth. The air near the wharves smells of tidewater, tar, horses, fish, and grain dust. Barrels and sacks wait for export. Ship bells ring. Ledgers record quantities with cold precision. Rice leaves the low country as a commodity, stripped of the muddy story that produced it. Scholars still argue about how much credit for Carolina rice success should be assigned to planter experimentation, environmental opportunity, enslaved African expertise, indigenous knowledge, or the combined pressure of Atlantic markets. Many now emphasize that African knowledge of rice cultivation, especially from West African rice regions, was crucial. The uncertainty lies in tracing specific techniques through records often written by enslavers, who had every incentive to praise themselves and forget the people doing the actual work. Very convenient for them, less convenient for truth. As the 19th century unfolds, rice plantations face change. Competition grows. Soils and water systems require constant repair. The Civil War and emancipation break the plantation labour system, though freedom arrives with struggle, poverty, and new forms of coercion rather than easy justice. Storms also damage fields. Tidal risk culture declines as an export empire, but Carolina Gold does not vanish from memory. It survives in seed, story, revival farming, and the longing of cooks who believe old grains carry old flavours. You return to the field at sunset. The rice heads glow bronze in the low light. Egrets lift from the canals. The river tide turns. Tugging at the gates, the mud cools. Mosquitoes begin their thin evening singing, horribly committed as always. A worker's path runs along the dike, worn by many feet. The field is beautiful, but beauty here is not innocence. It is layered with labour, skill, pain, survival, and taste. A bowl of Carolina Gold rice rests in your hands, warm and fragrant. The grains are separate, tender and slightly nutty. It is easy to admire the food. It is necessary to remember the hands. This rice fed colonial tables and built fortunes. But it also carried African knowledge, low-country adaptation, and the endurance of communities forced into the marsh and never fully erased by it. Night gathers over the tidal fields. Water murmurs through the trunks. Smoke rises from distant hearths, the golden crop darkens into shadow, and the land grows quiet except for frogs, insects, and the slow breathing of the river. You enter the everyday kitchen, the place where rice becomes less like history and more like breathing. No throne, no treaty, no royal storehouse, no merchant ship creaking under cargo. Just a pot, a fire, a little water, and someone measuring grain with the practiced seriousness of a person who knows that too much water creates sorrow and too little water creates tiny white pebbles of regret. The room is warm. Steam beads on the walls. The air smells of rinsed rice, smoke, garlic, onions, ginger, coconut milk, broth, butter, lentils, fish, herbs, or whatever the local hands have chosen. You hear the small music of cooking water poured into a pot, grains rattling softly in a cup, a lid settling into place, a spoon tapping clay, iron or steel. Rice is at home here. It has crossed wetlands, mountains, empires, and oceans, but its most intimate kingdom is still the kitchen. A mainstream historical fact sits gently beside the hearth. Rice became a staple food for billions because it is adaptable, filling, storable, and able to support countless cooking traditions across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. It can be boiled, steamed, fried, puffed, ground, fermented, sweetened, salted, wrapped, pressed, or simmered until it nearly disappears into comfort. Rice is never only one dish. It is 1,000 small domestic decisions. You sit near a pot of plain steamed rice. The lid lifts, and the steam rises into your face with a clean, soft fragrance. The grains shine faintly, tender and separate in one kitchen, sticky and clinging in another. A hand fluffs the rice with a paddle, careful not to crush it. That gesture alone carries generations of instruction, the kind passed down not in dramatic speeches, but in mild corrections. Not like that. Gently. Wait a little longer. Cover it again. Family history often sounds exactly like cooking advice. In East Asia, rice may arrive as the quiet centre of the meal, surrounded by soup, pickles, vegetables, fish, meat, tofu, sauces, and tea. It does not need to shout. It waits in the bowl, warm and reliable, ready to soften salt, catch sauce, and make everything else feel complete. In Korea, rice anchors tables bright with banchan, kimchi, soups, stews, and grilled foods. In China, rice may become congee, fried rice, rice noodles, dumpling wrappers, wine, vinegar, cakes, and delicate sweets. In Japan, it becomes morning bowl, festival mochi, sushi rice, onigiri carried in the hand, and rice gruel for the sick. You hold a nonigiri wrapped in seaweed. The rice is cool but tender, pressed into a triangle, perhaps filled with salmon, plum, or something salty enough to wake the tongue. It smells faintly of nori and grain. It is portable, humble, and brilliant. The snack says, quite calmly, that civilization improves when lunch can fit in your hand. In South Asia, rice can become biryani fragrant with spices and meat or vegetables. Idli batter fermented into soft cakes. Dosa batter spread into crisp golden sheets. Pongal simmered with lentils and pepper. Kheer sweetened with milk and cardamom, or a simple mound beside dal. You stand near a large pot of biryani. A saffron streaks the grains gold and orange. Steam carries cinnamon, clove, browned onions, mint, and ghee. The dish is celebratory, layered, and slightly dramatic, as if rice discovered theatre and decided to dress properly. In Southeast Asia, rice fills banana leaves, bamboo tubes, market baskets, and lacquer bowls. It becomes nasi lemak with coconut richness, Thai jasmine rice under curries, Vietnamese broken rice with grilled pork, Filipino sinangag fried with garlic for breakfast, Lao sticky rice rolled by hand, Indonesian rice cones for ceremony, and Cambodian rice porridge at dawn. The atmosphere around street stalls is alive, oil snapping, ladles clanging, scooters passing, rain dripping from awnings, rice steam mingling with chili, lime, fish sauce, and charcoal smoke. A quirky tidbit appears with breakfast leftover rice is often better for fried rice than fresh rice because it is drier and less sticky, allowing grains to separate in the pan. So yesterday's rice, slightly neglected in a covered bowl, wakes up the next morning with a second career. Very inspiring, really. Some of us would also like to return crisp, fragrant, and improved after a night in the fridge. In West Africa, rice enters jollof, wakye, rice balls, rice porridges, and dishes rich with tomato, pepper, onion, fish, meat, beans, greens, and palm oil. The pot of jollof is especially famous, and also famously argued over, because people are sensible enough to agree that rice is important and human enough to disagree passionately about whose version is best. The kitchen smells of pepper heat, tomato sweetness, smoke, and grain soaking up flavour until each spoonful is bright and full. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, rice absorbs the memory of many crossings. It appears with beans, peas, coconut, chicken, seafood, annatto, cilantro, cumin, plantains, and peppers. You stand beside a pot of rice and peas, where coconut milk, thyme, beans, and allspice deepen the steam. In another kitchen, arroz con pollo glows yellow with seasoning, chicken juices, and vegetables. In yet another, rice pudding cools with cinnamon on top, sweet and soft enough to quiet an anxious evening. In Europe, rice finds its way into risotto, paella, rice puddings, soups, stuffed vegetables, and comforting nursery foods. You stir risotto in northern Italy, adding broth slowly while the grains release starch into a creamy sauce. The spoon moves in circles, the pot sighs, the rice resists, then yields. In Spain, rice spreads wide in a pan, catching saffron, stock, seafood, rabbit, chicken, beans, or vegetables, depending on place and tradition. The bottom crust is when it forms well becomes a prize for people pretending not to watch it too closely. Scholars still debate how best to trace the origins of many famous rice dishes because recipes travel, borrow, change names, and become local over time. A dish may carry influences from trade, migration, empire, religion, class, and household invention. Cookbooks give one version, oral tradition gives another, and grandmothers often give a third while refusing to measure anything. This is not a flaw in food history, it is the flavour of it. You return to the simplest bowl, rice with salt, rice with broth, rice with milk, rice with beans, rice with tea poured over it, rice mashed for a baby, rice softened for an elder, rice reheated after a long shift, rice eaten alone in silence, rice shared from a large pot while everyone reaches in, laughs, complains, remembers, and asks for more. The kitchen grows quiet. A lid rests slightly open. A few grains cling to the side of the pot, stubborn and pale. The fire lowers to embers. You feel the warmth of the bowl against your palms and understand that everyday rice is not less historical than palace rice. It is more so. It is history repeated until it becomes comfort, labour transformed into habit, and the world's long hunger answered one spoonful at a time. You enter a research field in the soft light of morning, where rice plants stand in careful rows, each marked by a small tag fluttering in the breeze. The place is quiet, but it is not sleepy. It hums with intention. Water gleams between the plants. The air smells of mud, green leaves, paper labels, warm plastic trays, and the faint metallic scent of tools rinsed after use. Somewhere nearby, a pump coughs awake, sending water along a channel with a steady murmur. This is rice in the age of science, breeding and revolution. The grain is still rooted in mud, still bending under rain, still needing hands. Yet now it is also measured, crossed, tested, mapped, stored in seed banks, studied under microscopes, and discussed in conferences where everyone pretends the coffee is fine. Rice has entered laboratories, but it has not left the field. The field remains the real examiner, and it is wonderfully strict. A mainstream historical fact stands clearly here during the 20th century. Modern rice breeding helped increase yields dramatically in many parts of Asia, especially through semi-dwarf varieties associated with the Green Revolution. These varieties often responded well to fertilizer, irrigation, and careful management. They produced more grain and less tall straw, which meant plants were less likely to fall over before harvest. A shorter plant may sound less impressive, but in rice history, shortness became a superpower. You walk between experimental plots where each small rectangle contains a different rice line. One grows tall and airy, another is compact and deep green. Some mature early, some resist disease, some tolerate standing water better. Some have grains long and slender, others short and round. The leaves brush your fingers with a dry, papery edge. Dew wets your skin. Tags carry numbers, codes, and names that look unromantic, yet each may represent years of hope. Plant breeding begins with selection, but modern breeding makes selection more deliberate. Scientists cross plants with desirable traits, grow their offspring, test them, discard most, and keep the few that perform well. It sounds simple until you remember that plants are complicated, weather is moody, pests are persistent, and farmers quite reasonably prefer seeds that work in real soil rather than in somebody's optimistic chart. A rice variety must yield well, taste acceptable, fit local cooking habits, resist threats, and mature at the right time. It is a lot to ask from something that does not even have a face. You step into a greenhouse where the air is warmer and wetter than outside. Leaves crowd the benches, condensation pearls on glass. The smell is green, clean, and slightly mineral. A researcher moves from plant to plant, making controlled crosses by hand. Tiny flowers open briefly. Pollen must be managed at the right moment. Rice flowers are small and shy, not exactly dramatic performers. Still, inside them, future harvests are negotiated. A quirky tidbit hides in this delicate work. Rice flowers can self-pollinate before they even fully open, which makes controlled crossing a fussy little operation. Scientists sometimes have to remove immature anthers from a flower and introduce pollen from another plant with tweezers or fine tools. Imagine matchmaking for grains, except the couple is microscopic, the timing is rude, and the results take a growing season to judge. The Green Revolution changes life for many farmers, but not evenly and not without questions. High-yielding varieties can produce abundant harvests when paired with fertilizer, irrigation, pest control, and support systems. In regions where governments, research institutions, and farmers align, rice production rises sharply. More grain can mean fewer famines, fuller markets, and greater food security. For families living close to hunger, a stronger harvest is not an abstract statistic. It is the difference between fear and breath. You stand in a village where a new variety has just been harvested. The field smells of cut straw and sun. Bundles lie stacked at the edge. A farmer rubs grains between his palms, testing dryness. The mood is cautiously pleased. Nobody wants to celebrate too early, because agriculture has trained humanity to be suspicious of good news until it is safely stored. Still, the yield is heavy. The sacks fill. The children watch the pile grow. Yet dependence grows too. Some modern varieties need purchased inputs to perform their best. Fertilizer costs money. Irrigation favours those with access to water. Pesticides can damage health and ecosystems when misused. Traditional varieties may decline when new ones spread. Taste, texture, aroma, cultural value, and resilience can be lost if yield becomes the only measure. Rice science solves problems, but also creates new choices. Progress is useful, but it rarely arrives alone. It brings luggage. Scholars still argue whether the Green Revolution should be remembered mainly as a humanitarian success that prevented mass hunger, or as a mixed transformation that increased production while deepening inequalities and ecological pressures in some regions. Both views hold evidence. The harvests were real, so were the costs. History does not always allow a comfortable verdict, which is inconvenient for anyone hoping to fall asleep with a simple moral. But the truth can be calm and complicated at the same time. You enter a seed bank where the atmosphere changes completely. The rooms are cool, dry, and carefully controlled. Metal shelves hold packets and jars of rice seed from many lands and many histories. Some are modern breeding lines. Some are traditional varieties saved from villages, terraces, deltas, floodplains, and uplands. The air smells faintly of paper, cold storage, and dry grain. Each packet is a sleeping archive. Inside are traits that may matter one day: drought tolerance, fragrance, disease resistance, salt tolerance, flood survival, or flavors remembered by elders. Modern rice science also looks at genes. Researchers study the rice genome to understand traits at a deeper level. They identify markers linked to yield, grain quality, plant height, disease resistance, and stress tolerance. New tools help breeders choose seedlings more efficiently. The work may involve computers, field trials, DNA analysis, and a great many spreadsheets, because apparently even rice cannot escape spreadsheets. Somewhere, a scientist has named a file final version and later created 12 more versions. This too is part of civilization. One famous scientific goal is helping rice survive environmental stress. Some varieties are bred to tolerate flooding, allowing plants to endure days underwater when sudden floods cover fields. Others are bred for drought-prone areas or salty soils, especially where seawater intrudes into deltas. In a warming world, the old relationship between rice and water becomes more uncertain. Too much water, too little water, water at the wrong time, water carrying salt. The crop that fed billions must now learn new forms of endurance. You return to the field as afternoon light turns golden. Researchers walk the rows with notebooks, tablets, measuring poles, and quiet concentration. Farmers stand with them, discussing plant height, grain weight, cooking quality, disease marks, and whether this new line is worth trusting. The conversation matters. A variety succeeds only when it fits the lives of people who plant it. Science can open doors, but farmers decide which seeds enter the household. The rice plants rustle in a warm breeze. Their leaves sound like soft paper. Water insects skate across the paddy. A bird lands on a post, watching everything with the calm judgment of a senior professor. You touch a ripening panicle, heavy with grain, and feel the slight bend of the stem. In this age, rice is ancient and modern at once. It belongs to mud, hand, laboratory, gene map, seed vault, market, and supper bowl. It has been shortened, crossed, selected, rescued, improved, criticized, celebrated, and worried over. The grain remains small, but the questions around it are vast: how to feed more people, how to protect land and water, how to honor local taste, how to avoid dependence, how to keep enough diversity alive for futures no one can fully predict. Evening settles over the research plots. The labels flutter once, then still. Frogs begin calling from the water channels. Somewhere, a rice cooker clicks in a nearby home, quietly ending the day with steam. Science has changed the grain, but the promise remains familiar: a field ripening under the sky, a harvest hoped for, a bowl waiting to be filled. You stand in a low delta at noon, where the air is bright, hot, and restless. The rice fields stretch outward in flat green squares, divided by channels that glimmer like thin pieces of sky. The mud beneath your feet is warm near the surface. The water smells faintly of algae, silt, fertilizer, and salt carried inland by a tide that should not be here quite so strongly. In the distance, a pump drones. A bird cries once and lifts away from the field as if even the bird has errands. This is rice in an age of climate, crisis, and survival. The grain is still familiar, still humble in the bowl, but the world around it is changing. Heat arrives harder, storms arrive heavier, floods come suddenly, then drought follows with cracked earth and worried faces. Sea levels rise into river mouths, salt creeps into freshwater fields. Rain loses its old habits, and farmers who once trusted seasonal patterns now watch the sky with a new kind of suspicion. A mainstream historical fact is clear in this landscape: rice is one of the world's most important staple crops, feeding billions of people, but it is highly vulnerable to climate pressures such as heat stress, drought, flooding, salinity, pests, and shifting water availability. Rice loves water. Yes, but not chaos. It needs water in the right amount, at the right time, in the right place. Very specific, this plant, like a guest who says they are easygoing, then provides a detailed pillow preference. You walk beside a farmer checking the field. The rice plants are green, but their tips show stress, some yellowing, some curling under heat. The farmer bends and pulls a little water into his palm. He tastes it lightly, then spits. Too salty. The gesture is old and practical, but the concern is modern and growing. In coastal deltas, seawater intrusion can move into irrigation canals, especially during dry seasons or storm surges. Rice roots do not enjoy salt. The plant weakens, yields fall, and fields that once fed families become uncertain. The atmosphere presses close. Sweat gathers at your neck. Dragonflies dart above the water. The paddy surface reflects a white sun so bright it almost hurts to look. You hear the farmer's sandals sucking at the mud, the buzz of insects, the low clatter of a motorbike on a distant road. The field seems peaceful only because plants suffer quietly. Heat is one of rice's great new trials. When temperatures climb too high, especially during flowering, rice may fail to set grain properly. A field can look healthy, tall and green, yet produce empty husks. That is a cruel trick. The kind of disappointment that arrives late, when labour has already been spent and hope has already leaned forward. Farmers call it by different names in different places, but the feeling is recognisable everywhere you have done the work, and the season has changed the terms. In another region, drought has taken the field in the opposite direction. You step onto cracked soil where rice should stand in shallow water. The cracks are wide enough to catch your toes. The air smells dusty, bitter, and dry. Wind moves loose straw along the ground. A canal nearby holds only a ribbon of muddy water, guarded by arguments no one wanted to have. Rice farming under water scarcity becomes a contest of pumps, wells, reservoirs, schedules, and money. Those with resources may survive. Those without them wait for clouds. A quirky tidbit sits in the flooded field's hidden chemistry. Traditional flooded rice paddies can release methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, because organic matter decomposes underwater without much oxygen. So rice is both a crop threatened by climate change and, in some systems, a contributor to it. That is awkward, like discovering your comforting bowl of dinner has a small atmospheric side hustle. Fortunately, water management methods can sometimes reduce emissions while saving irrigation water. Farmers and scientists are testing many adaptations. Some use alternate wetting and drying, letting fields dry for controlled periods instead of keeping them continuously flooded. Some shift planting dates to avoid the worst heat. Some grow salt-tolerant or flood-tolerant varieties. Some improve drainage. Some collect rainwater or restore local canals. Some return to traditional varieties that may yield less in perfect conditions but survive better when conditions misbehave. There is no single rescue method. Rice fields are local, and survival is local too. You visit a seed exchange in a rural community. The room smells of dry grain, woven sacks, old wood, and tea. Farmers sit in a loose circle, passing small packets of seed from hand to hand. Each packet carries a name, a story, a reason for being kept. This one survives standing water. This one cooks fragrant. This one matures before the late storms. This one belonged to a grandmother who insisted it tasted better. And honestly, grandmothers are difficult to argue with. Diversity becomes insurance against an uncertain sky. Scholars still argue over how future rice systems should balance high-yield production, traditional seed diversity, climate adaptation, water conservation, and farmer independence. Some emphasize advanced breeding, improved irrigation, digital forecasting, and global research. Others warn that technology alone cannot solve land inequality, debt, water rights, or the loss of local knowledge. The discussion is not tidy because the problem is not tidy. Hunger, ecology, economics, and culture all sit in the same bowl. You move to a city market where the climate story becomes price. Sacks of rice are stacked beneath fluorescent lights. The smell is dry grain, plastic packaging, diesel fumes from delivery trucks, and fried snacks from a nearby stall. Shoppers compare prices carefully. A small increase can matter to families who buy rice every week when drought, flood, export limits, fuel costs, or conflict disrupt supply. The change travels from distant fields into household budgets. Rice is global, but worry is always personal. In a delta village at dusk, People repair a canal bank damaged by a recent flood. Mud covers their legs. A boy carries stones in a bucket too large for him. Walking with great seriousness, women pack clay into gaps. Men drive wooden stakes. Someone jokes that the canal has become more demanding than a spoiled prince, and tired laughter moves along the bank. The smell is wet earth, sweat, and crushed grass. The work is urgent, but the mood is not hopeless. Humans have always repaired the edges of disaster with jokes, tools, and sawbacks. Night begins to cool the fields. Frogs call from the ditches. The pump falls silent. A pot of rice steams in a nearby house, and its scent is simple, warm, almost tender. A family eats under a fan, listening to news about rain, prices, and another storm forming over the sea. The bowl is ordinary. The questions around it are enormous. You stand outside under a darkening sky. The rice plants rustle softly, their blades touching one another in the evening air. They have fed kings, villagers, monks, workers, travellers, children, and elders. Now they ask for something different: adaptation, restraint, memory, and care. The grain remains small in the hand, but the future of billions may still depend on whether fields like this can endure heat, salt, flood, drought, and the restless weather of a changing world. You return to a simple bowl of rice, warm between your hands, quiet enough to seem almost empty of history. Steam rises in soft threads. The grains rest together, pale and tender, carrying only a faint fragrance at first: clean water, starch, a little sweetness. Perhaps the smoke of the kitchen or the leaf it was wrapped in. Outside, the world may be loud, hurried, expensive, and deeply committed to unnecessary notifications. But here, for a moment, there is only warmth, breath, and the small comfort of food. You lift the bowl closer. Its heat touches your palms. The surface of the rice glows in lamplight, every grain separate or gently clinging, depending on the variety and the hand that cooked it. You hear the quiet scrape of a spoon, the tap of chopsticks, the soft press of fingers shaping a mouthful. This is where the long history of rice becomes intimate again. Not in a palace, not in a warehouse, not in a field beneath a brutal sun. In a bowl. A mainstream historical fact settles gently here. Rice is one of the most widely consumed staple foods on Earth, feeding billions across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and many other regions. It has supported dense populations, shaped cuisines, influenced economies, and entered rituals from birth to death. Yet its power has always depended on ordinary labour: planting, watering, weeding, harvesting, drying, milling, storing, cooking, serving, and sharing. The grain may look small, but it carries the weight of countless days. You imagine the hands behind it: a farmer standing in cool mud at sunrise, a child carrying seedlings, a worker opening a water gate, a cook rinsing grain until the water runs cloudy, then clear, a merchant tying a sack, a grandmother measuring with her palm instead of a cup, because cups are for people who do not yet know, a student eating rice late at night beside books, a labourer eating from a tin lunchbox, a monk receiving alms, a family placing rice on an altar. One grain enters one mouth, but behind it stands a crowd. The bowl also holds the many forms rice has taken: long grain rice fragrant as flowers, short grain rice sticky enough to hold shape, red rice, black rice, brown rice, white rice, glutinous rice pounded into cakes, rice flour steamed into noodles, rice fermented into wine, rice simmered into porridge for the ill, rice fried the next morning because leftovers deserve ambition too, rice cooked with beans, lentils, coconut, saffron, tomatoes, seafood, herbs, milk, sugar, broth, peppers, or nothing at all. A quirky tidbit rests at the edge of the bowl. There are tens of thousands of rice varieties in the world, many with local names, flavours, colours, and growing habits. Some smell like pandan or popcorn, some survive floods, some endure drought, some are treasured mostly because they taste like home. It is almost funny to think of rice as plain when humanity has spent millennia making it astonishingly diverse. Plain rice is rarely plain to the person who grew up with that exact bowl. You sit in a quiet kitchen as night leans against the window. The air smells of cooked grain and cooling wood. A pot lid rests slightly crooked, letting out one last sigh of steam. Somewhere beyond the walls, rain begins to fall. The sound is soft at first, then steadier, touching roof, leaves, road, and field. Rice has always listened to rain. Too much, too little, too early, too late, and human lives bend around the answer. There is uncertainty even in this final bowl. Historians and archaeologists still debate many details of rice's earliest domestication, spread, and cultural transformation. They study ancient grains, plant impressions, genetic patterns, tools, field systems, written records, oral traditions, and cooking remains. But no single method captures the full story. Rice history is not a straight road. It is a river delta, branching and rejoining, carrying silt from many places. You look more closely at the grains. Some are broken, some are whole, some cling to the side of the bowl. They remind you that food history is never only about abundance. Rice has fed billions, but it has also been taxed, hoarded, traded, rationed, stolen, and used to command labour. It has filled festival tables and prison bowls, temple offerings and refugee meals, royal banquets and street carts under rain. It has comforted, enriched, exploited, nourished, and survived. Yet the ordinary act of eating rice often returns it to tenderness. Someone cooks it because someone must be fed. Someone saves the last serving. Someone scrapes the bottom of the pot. Someone blows on a spoonful for a child. Someone eats alone, quietly, and feels less alone because the food is familiar. A bowl can be humble and still hold the world. The atmosphere grows softer. The lamp hums faintly. Rain taps the roof in a slow, forgiving rhythm. You feel the bowl cooling in your hands, its warmth fading but not gone. The rice no longer seems like a background food. It seems like a witness. It has watched humans settle wetlands, carve mountains, build kingdoms, cross oceans, argue over recipes, count taxes, pray for rain, invent machines, save seeds, and keep cooking. You take one final mouthful. It is mild, warm, and grounding. Nothing dramatic happens. No trumpet sounds. No king enters. No scholar clears his throat. The grain simply does what it has always done best. It feeds. And now, as the night deepens, let the bowl rest on the table. Let the fields grow quiet in your mind. Let the paddies reflect the moon, still and silver. Let the terraces fade into mist. Let the rivers slow. Let the kitchens grow dim, one by one, across islands, deltas, mountains, cities, and villages. Somewhere, rain is falling on young rice. Somewhere, grain is drying in the sun. Somewhere, a pot is just beginning to steam. Somewhere, a tired person is lifting a warm bowl and finding, inside it, enough comfort to continue. So breathe gently. Feel the weight of the day loosen. The story of rice does not end. It settles, like steam on a cool evening, like water in a quiet field, like a seed waiting patiently beneath the soil. The world keeps turning soft and dark, and the small grain rests in the hands of billions, carrying history without hurry.